Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. I hope you enjoy these stories. I have a Patreon which is linked in the description, and I also have a podcast where you can hear my stories uploaded there too, which is also in the description. I use social media, but the only one I use is Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Insomniac Horror. I have a quick message before the video starts as always, which is just a quick one. So if you want to go straight into the stories, there's timestamps below for that. So I'd like to share this. I think if you're someone who's struggling with mental health or struggling with yourself generally, it's very important not to get too caught up in the opinions of others and try not to listen to too many good things or bad things about yourself. Just stay focused on what your missions and goals are, because the problem is if you constantly listen to positive feedback, you might constantly try to appease those people and try and act in a way that they want, which might not be right for you. And if people are saying negative things, it's probably not accurate. And again, it can be toxic if you believe that. And I know this has the potential to really have a negative impact on your mindset and the way you think of yourself. So just try and take a step back when you receive feedback in some regards and just assess the situation. Still take in feedback from others, but don't take it too greatly to heart. Just do what you know is true and keep on, and ignore people that are negative. Often they're only negative because they can't do something themselves and they're jealous of what you're doing. And remember, you can only live your own life, so just focus on you and getting better and achieving your goals. So I hope everyone's doing great and enjoys these stories. I'll speak to you all soon. This occurred while backpacking in the Appalachian Trail in northern PA, while me and a friend had just finished hiking up a very large hill and were ready for lunch. We had planned on eating at a shelter that was another 2 miles down and up another hill. After some discussion, we decided to eat at a shelter as there would be water here. Now after we arrive at the shelter, we come across another hiker. No, this guy was just carrying an old backpack and was digging for crumbs out the bottom of a Fritzo's bag, so he just seems out of it. We said to him was he backpacking or day hiking, never making eye contact, but he mutters out backpacking. We then ask him if he was section hiking or through hiking, as in doing the entire trail. He looks at us with this weird look and says, I just go hiking through. After a little bit of talking and avoiding our questions, he says, I'm gonna go. And he packs all of his things in his bag. We ask him his name, but he clearly had no idea what we're talking about, which we really find odd. He also doesn't explain what trail that he's on. After sort of explaining what he meant, he said, oh right, hatchet, which was obviously a load of rubbish because the guy was holding a pickaxe in his hand when he said this. We continued hiking and we reach our camping spot. We get settled for the night when I'm woken by Hatchet rustling through my backpack. Now me and my friend both use hammocks, and I had my backpack wrapped around the tree my hammock is on, so he ended up shaking the entire hammock. I scream hey, and he looks in the hammock, stares at me for a second, then bolts. By the time I get out of the hammock, he's nowhere to be seen. Turns out he stole a pack of tuna from my bag and some granola bars. The weird part was that when we get back into town, it turned out that old Hatchet was on the run. There was wanted posters for him up on all the doors. It turns out 2 weeks prior he had mugged a couple of people, leaving one guy pretty bloody. The whole thing was pretty weird, and we ended up giving our statement to the police, but we don't know whether they caught him or not. Now I was out in a nearby lake for the first day of summer with a pretty large group of friends. We got the alcohol, nowhere to be for a couple of days, and we knew it was going to be a good time. That's when creepy stuff starts happening. When the park ranger would come around eventually, so a select group of us opted to stay sober until he came by so we could talk to him without being caught. Now this seems to be a good plan, so he comes by and me and a few of the others go chat to him. He leaves and does no harm. We open up a few bottles and start catching up, and another truck pulls up, and a guy gets out. We don't recognize the guy. Me and a few of the other guys get up quickly to see what he wants. He told us that he was a park ranger and says, "Have we seen another guy going around pretending to be one?" He then tells us that this man is pretty dangerous. What the hell? So we tell him what we knew about him, and he turns a blind eye to our beverages in return. About an hour later, the first truck pulls in with its high beams on and just sits there. Us being stupid teenagers tell the girls go in the tents and we'll handle it. We grabbed different things, some got knives and some got blunt objects, and started towards his truck waiting for something to happen. Nothing. About 5 minutes later he peels out and speeds off. The night continues and we got more and more drunk, forgetting about the truck. We eventually go to swim for a bit. When we're done in the lake, we went back up to the camp drying off, and we find all of our clothes hanging neatly on nearby trees with boot prints around them. Now none of us wore boots, by the way. First off, I love to camp. I've already been doing it my whole life. I've never had a scary experience until this past summer, when my boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality camping time. We had always gone with several other people, but this is the first time it's only us two. When we get out, we go to the car and decide to prep our gear for the mile hike back to the camping spot when two sketchy looking dudes come out of the trailer head, eyes on us. They then continue on to their old school VW camper van. I have a weird feeling about it but shrugged it off really, proceeding to go back to the camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times and knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I had a handful of different camping spots that I realised we could go to, and proceeded to check it out and decide on the best one for us. I then noticed what appears to be somebody camping further up the hill, so I decided that it's probably best if we pick a spot a little further down where we're mostly out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I still heard him yelling with someone else near the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we get everything set up, so I figured that I should start looking for firewood. Suddenly, this guy appears out of nowhere asking us if we could help, and offers to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laugh because we're in the woods, surrounded by trees, thus we can pick this up for free. He said I wouldn't find much wood because they'd already cleared it out. For weeks. For weeks, I said to him. How long have you been here? And he said almost a month. Now the longest anyone can camp in a national forest is 2 weeks really. I already had the creeps about him and he claimed that he was there alone. I'm a little confused and I say, well, I heard you yelling with someone, and that he had referred to more people when talking about the wood. He then stammered backwards and said, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there on the other side of the river. He then proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived and he was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, KY, and had been living in the woods, interestingly, in an area very close to where I currently work. Strangely coincidental. I knew exactly where he's talking about because I see homeless people and drug addicts coming in out of the woods daily. So basically, he's a homeless person who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided that he would just live there instead. He's been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for food and beer, but he said we're the first people he's seen in weeks. His story's all over the place, and I knew he was lying about much of it. He wasn't alone, even though he claims to be. He even took us to the camp where there was literally tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he liked camping up where he could see everything and everyone, then showed us to the campsite. He had a strange shot view. By the time I finished talking to him, it's dark, and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to be polite to get him on his way again, so I can have a minute to process this. That's when I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that sketchy homeless creep right up there. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. I said, let's quietly get our stuff together and get straight out of there, which we eventually did and left our new trap set up because they would make too much noise. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get out of there, he said, "How's it going down there?" and proceeds quickly to try and follow us. We ended up getting out of there quickly, but in my mind, we were either going to get robbed, killed, or something else. Because he was not alone, his stories didn't make sense, and clearly there was lots of other people around we didn't know about, living off the grid. I called the park rangers the next morning and told them about him, and luckily, all he got from us was the new tarps. Now I was camping in the woods, in the backwoods specifically, with the nearest sign of humanity being a National Guard depot about 5 miles away. It was the week before Labor Day, and the campground was completely empty. We were half asleep in our tent when we heard what sounded like a little girl laughing in the distance. It continued for literally an hour before vanishing. I barely slept that night. Sounding like a dentist drill. We ended up staying up in the morning and leaving and still not knowing what it was to this day. I was walking with my cousins about 14 years ago when we found what looked like an old burnt out house. So naturally being kids, at the time having no sense of self-preservation, we decided we're going to explore it, and it was just full of charred wood and crap. But then my cousin found the entrance to a cellar. We busted an old rusted lock off the door and looked inside. It was dark down there, and we didn't really have any reason to go poking around it. Plus, we were starting to get freaked out, so we kicked some dirt down into it and walk off. When we get about 15 yards away from the house, some friends and I went about 2 hours into the woods one week, found a clearing and set up camp. After fishing, eating and drinking, we all fall asleep. Probably around 3 a.m. while it was dark as hell outside, there's the sound of some branches snapping which wake up my friend and I. We jumped out of our tent and grabbed our machetes, watching everyone else wake up. Whatever it was then gave off the loudest noise, sounding like a dentist drill. We ended up staying up in the morning and leaving and still not knowing what it was to this day. I was walking with my cousins about 14 years ago when we found what looked like an old burnt out house. So naturally being kids, at the time having no sense of self-preservation, we decided we're going to explore it, and it was just full of charred wood and crap. But then my cousin found the entrance to a cellar. We busted an old rusted lock off the door and looked inside. It was dark down there, and we didn't really have any reason to go poking around it. Plus, we were starting to get freaked out, so we kicked some dirt down into it and walk off. When we get about 15 yards away from the house, one cousin says that he heard a noise, so we stop. And yeah, there was a noise like somebody coming up the rotten stairs of the house. We peel back through the trees and see a kind of fuzzy shape crawling out of it which we left open. It looks like a big old dog. And then it stood upright, and yeah, we got out of there. We all ran off in different directions like morons, each of us convinced that the cellar thing is chasing us. I ran right through some briars in a panic and tore my arms and legs up, which got me in trouble when I got home. We're all fine otherwise, but did avoid going back into the woods for a long time. The closest thing I can figure it was a large black bear, or maybe a baby one to be specific. Maybe it had another entrance that we didn't know about, but seeing this hairy dark thing come out of the cellar standing up was really like a horror film. And that's presuming it was actually a bear and nothing else. My cat used to bring things in for me, mostly dead but sometimes living. He brought me a small wild rabbit that wasn't really passed away, and I made a bandage for it. I kept it for about a week before it was going around normally. My dad eventually said it's probably good to go back out again. So I took it out to the creeks near my house and put it under a tree by some vines. I took maybe 5 steps before I heard it scream and turned around to see something ripped it in half. Now, I never saw what ripped it in half. I'm not sure whether it is a fox, but I literally couldn't see any other things around, and that's what terrified me. I have no idea to this day what happened to it, or why it passed away so quickly. I never discovered exactly what it was, and it probably was something normal, but the not knowing part kills me, and I think it's very bizarre I couldn't see or hear anything before or after the event. For years, I've been an avid backpacker and I live in New Mexico, so I go to some really remote places, mostly alone. Now, 2 experiences which stuck out to me are the following. One for the sheer danger of the experience, and the other because, well, I can't really explain what happened, even to this day. Now, if you've ever been alone at night, more than a day's hike under pack from anything not desert or 10k feet mountain, it might be hard to get the right mindset to appreciate the scariness of it, but here it goes. It was 2 days, about 26 miles into the wilderness, which is mostly lightly used trails that extend across a huge mesa at the eastern base of James Mountains in central NM, crisscrossing canyons that cut across Mesa. It was July 4th weekend, and daytime temps were in high 90s and low 100s. Being summer, I didn't carry a tent, just a light bag and a pad. Now, the first night was brilliant, beautiful, and I passed out without incident. Near the end of my second day, I come across a fresh mauled deer, killed in the dry canyon. I've seen mountain lion kills before. This appears to be one, until a fresh kill means a cat is probably close by. Since it's right near the trail, I took a quick peek and then move on, climbing out of the canyon, not thinking much of it. About an hour later, along the ring of the canyon, I found a nice semi-sheltered sandstone lump with a little alcove on one side. The canyon's cliff was off on one side about 15 feet away, and had a clear view of everything from the south and west, with the canyon directly north of me, seeming like a perfect place for me to spend the night. As a crow flies, I was only about 100 yards or so from where I'd noticed the kill earlier in the evening, although this is pretty far from my mind at the time. So I laid out my pad and bag in the partial alcove, munched on some jerky and half a power bar, slipping the last of my water, and that's a different story, trying just to doze off staring at the sky. Now, it's very dark and scary, but I see a shooting star and whatnot, until suddenly, there's a blood-curdling howl erupting from the canyon. My brain immediately kicks into its full throttle. There it is again. Butt naked, but from Homer Simpson flip-flops. I'm avoiding cactuses in yucca, and juniper scrubs in the dark like a ballet dancer, not falling off the cliff, frantically trying to assess my situation. My food was hung about 100 yards from me in a piddly little pinnon. That was the largest grime thing that I could find, so at least the only bait I had to worry about was myself. It's closer. I have figured out by this point that the howling was at least one mountain lion. What I had counted on not happening was that the sounds of a fairly angry lion was following me on the trail. The trail that I camped on about 20 feet from a 400 feet cliff made me in a very uncomfortable sandwich situation. It's July, and I've been in the wilderness for 2 days. I smell like Carl's Jr. dumpsters, in other words, greasy food. My little alcove was actually situated a bit higher than the rest of the terrain around me, so I could see anything but to the east, which is of course where the trail comes from, and where the racket is getting louder. In a moment of desperation, I now realize that I'm a fool trying to out-hike the cat. The minute it catches a fresh scent, it will stalk me. It's what they're made for. Running like a madman would make me dinner faster, so I decide that my only choice at this point is just to wait and see what happens. I have a few big rocks nearby that I've collected in my hiking poles should it come to that. Not much of a chance though, really. The howling keeps getting louder, but at the same frequency, so whatever had gotten into this cat wasn't changing. So I sat crouched like Gollum on the top of my little sandstone castle. I'm now waiting for whatever's gonna happen next. It took about half an hour and several more howls later before I noticed that the last two have become more and more faint, and then bam, I hear what sounds like a third one join in, and they're just to the east of me, where I can't see. I desperately fight the urge to pop my head up and have a look for them. I keep telling myself not to act like prey, so I can finally hear twigs and things snapping as they've definitely begun to move from that area of the trail through to a scrubby area more towards me. This is 2003, so no cell phone. I'm thinking to myself, 30 years old and alone, might be about to jump off a cliff to try and avoid being eaten to death. Either way, I was pretty sure nobody was going to find me for weeks. I'd left an itinerary with some of the forest services, but I deviated from the plan for a second because the canyons that I'm on might have water there, or they could be dry. I decided to head at least 10 miles west of where I was planning on being. Unfortunately, the only dry water was at the rock pool that was stagnant, so I didn't want to try filtering from it, from the fear that my filtering might not work and might make things worse. This is my escape plan if it comes to it, but it doesn't make sense. All this is racing in my head, and finally, I see what I can only describe as the mountain lion centipede, 3 of them, single file, 2 juveniles and a mummy. I think they're really pretty, but I've never been so scared, yet in awe. In the starlight they appear almost white. They broke formation around my rock cove and start sniffing away. I'm like 5 feet from mummy at this point and pretty convinced I'm gonna get mauled. I kept as still as I could, probably stopping my breath and waiting. The juvenile cats seem less interested in me than themselves. However, their mum is checking me out, and has made eye contact at least twice until she turns and runs away to the west, and the little ones follow, and I'm there, confused and naked and disorientated, but not mauled to death. Now, I didn't sleep well. I waited all night. They didn't return. I got myself together before sunrise and headed off in search of water. I eventually found some around midday near a little canyon with some mossy rocks. I drank up and then snapped in the shade for a few hours before refilling my water bag and heading onwards. As far in as I was, I didn't have much choice but to spend another night out there, thankfully this time uneventful. I remembered returning to my truck the following day and getting all freaked out because I saw big paws around where I was parked. Now for the next story. This is in Rio Grande, Gorge, up near Taos, NM, October 94. I was camping solo in the gorge, just north of where the Rio Hondas meets the Rio Grande. There's zero human activity at night, but during the day, manned by hot springs draws a little traffic. The bridge nearby gets some local trout fishing action. I had spent my day wandering around on the west rim of the gorge and had returned to my campsite, which was situated basically within arm's reach of Rio Grande. Now I fired up my whisper light and boiled a little river water for ramen. I then eat for a while and enjoy the last bit of sunlight as it goes over the rim of the gorge and kick back and try and sleep. Just as I'm about to nod off, I had the feeling I'm not alone, and I figured I'm just paranoid and continued my happy journey to Dreamsland. Being October in northern New Mexico, it was fairly chilly after the sun goes down, so I was bundled up in the down bag and had a hoodie on. I think I remembered feeling a wet nose against my cheek at first, before I felt claws on my thighs. 2 badgers had crawled onto my lap, and were checking me out. Now badgers are pretty cool and cute from a distance, but up close at night, they're pretty terrifying. I screamed and jumped up, and they looked back at me. Now this isn't my main story, but it sets some of the stage. Now they won't leave, so eventually I got silly and started planning water out of the river and throwing it at them. This made me cold, and I think it amuses them more than it scared them away. Still, they don't get any closer after that, so I decided I don't care. I still had a bit of fright, and my imagination was going crazy, so sleep was not an option. I sat there and popped off in my sack, giving the evil a couple of times to them, trying to make them go off. Now, against a warm rock, waiting there to fall asleep, or just wait for the morning to come. Now, it's still relatively early in the evening, so if I stayed up all night, it was going to be a long one. I was going over this and other things, just in my head, and I noticed a faintly blue glow coming from somewhere far up in the gorge. Now, the blue glow is much lighter over a shorter span of time, and it seems to be accompanied by a faint buzzing sound. Anyone from NM will start rolling their eyes thinking about it, but I need to tell you, it was an odd blue too, not white blue like moonlight, but bright blue like emergency lights. Not that bizarre, but ultra blue like LED Xmas lights even. It was almost like I imagined the quality of light when you're underwater, in one of those impossibly blue Caribbean bays, shimmery and immersive, but not particularly intense. So I'm pretty interested at this point, and not only a small bit freaked out. Again, I brushed it off, dismissing my anxiety as a result of God knows what. It persists and seems to be getting closer and louder. The blue never seemed to get any brighter, but seemed to become clearer. It's very hard to describe because what happened next dominates my memory for the next few minutes so strongly that I'm not sure what happened right before. What I saw was a wall of blue light moving between each of the walls of the gorge. I couldn't tell if it ended with the river or extended beyond it. Now, the Rio Grande isn't particularly deep at this or any point, so it wouldn't have made a difference really, but the buzzing was definitely coming from the wall of blue or slightly above it. I still had no clue what was happening. I realised that I'd better bolt out of the gorge, lest I find the detail of what this thing is. I grab my gear, throw everything unceremoniously into my bivvy, then boogie along the river until I get to the ridge where the Hondo meets the Grande River, about half a mile, dragging all of my equipment behind me like toys in a pillowcase. I had no car. A friend and his girlfriend had driven me there from Albuquerque and dropped me off while I spent the weekend there, whining and dining in Teos, 94, so definitely no cell phone. I get to the bridge and this is where things get really off the deep end. On the bridge is an old man, looks Kiowa, on a horse, wearing an old black velvet boss of the plain style hat, poncho, cloak, saddle blanket over his torso. Interestingly, moreover, he's just parked there on his horse looking north. Now looking at the wall of light, I yell out hey, but there's no response, basically noping out of there. I startled to run and stumble along the road to the east, along the Rio Hondo and hopefully towards something or someone not freaking me out. The buzzing's now louder. I look back and I'm only about 20 yards away from the bridge. The man on the horse finally looks at me. Our eyes met and I flipped out. No other reason than feeling complete and utter repulsion. I knew I wasn't supposed to be here now, walking backwards, keeping my eyes on the bridge. I was fixated on the man on the horseback, trying to fight the urge to turn my back on him and run in for the wind. I don't. I see him raise a hand out with his palm to the light. It then stops immediately. The buzz trails off and a bottle of rocket type blue light shoots up into the sky. I look back at the guy and no old guy on a horseback is there. It's possible that he got his horse to turn around very quickly, but it shouldn't be possible. Now this was almost 20 years ago and I still have no explanation for what I saw. I'd loved if it was all an hallucination, but I think it's very unlikely. I don't believe in supernatural or paranormal, but I seriously don't know what to make of this encounter. I never have. Now I live out in Australia, and there's plenty of creepy things in the bush, but here's some that stood out for me. The first is when my car is getting serviced in an industrial area, and the quickest route to walk there from my house was cutting through bush, typical Australian bush. There was a vague track to follow, which then disappeared, but I knew eventually I'd end up back in suburbia. But in the middle of the bush, on a cliff top, was a large round 2 meters across man-made opening, which on closer inspection was like a well linked with bricks, about 10 meters deep. It had a steel gate over the top to stop people falling in, but it really looks like something in the ring. I hurried out and left, quickly going to where my car is to ask about it, and they were very vague and didn't really want to say anything. I eventually found out it was a temporary place to house convicts who were building the road across from the Blue Mountains. The guards were worried they'd run away at night, so they would keep them in the wells so they couldn't escape. Apparently it opened up to a large room at the bottom. 2. Camping beside a river as with my mum in an area of South Blue Mountains. We're the only ones there, apart from a farmhouse. The farmhouse is around 1 kilometer or 2 away. Now randomly, in the middle of the night, a guy appears and starts ranting about the need for us to protect him from wild dogs. He was wearing a blue weird shirt and tattered clothes, and my mum told him that you must go, but he wouldn't. Eventually we said that we're going to bed, but he sat outside near our tent with a huge knife. I remembered my mum saying that he's not going to kill us, but I didn't believe it. The next morning, he was gone, and we went up to the farmhouse to tell them, and they said, "Oh, you must have met him. He means well, but he lives far from here. I'll have a word with him to stay away." The next night, more tourists came and everything was fine. We went home and don't think much of it. A few months later, a guy was arrested not far from where we were on suspicion of being connected to several missing people. The moment I saw him, I recognized him on the news. Turned out that the guy was arrested and was exactly the person we saw who actually murdered hitchhikers along the highway heading south and buried them in a forest on the other side of the river. So about 1.5 years ago, my girlfriend went down to a state park that we frequently go as we only live about an hour away. It's one of the best parks within a day trip reach for us to hike and swim and explore in general. So the one day we get bored of the normal hiking areas and decide that we're going to drive around the back roads and go deeper into the woods. No map, we're just deciding which way to turn when we get to intersections and go from there. We passed a random old cemetery that I remembered couldn't have been more than a mile or so down the road before we noticed a dilapidated road with a chain in front of it so cars can't go in, and we decided to park the car and go and explore the area in general. There were no signs for no trespassing or anything like that, so we continue. Now I'll never forget the weird feeling that I had as soon as we go in there. You kind of get the sense that you're not meant to be there, but listen, it's not a bad area really. It seems like a beautiful secluded place, and we decide that we should go in further before we notice an abandoned visitor centre that obviously had been there for a long time. Now it's really weird there. About 100 feet away from walking up to the building, and the alarms begin to go off in my head, saying you shouldn't be here. But my girlfriend at this time is freaking out internally. She wants to leave as she feels uneasy and unwelcome to go where we are as well. But I want to explore the building because I love abandoned places. In the time of walking up, I realise that the woods are silent. I can't hear bugs anymore. No chirps or birds even. Not even branches in the wind. We get to the building and my girlfriend is pleading that we go back. I said let's just take a step further in. I'm approaching the stairs to the door from the left side, and no joke, straight out of a cheesy horror movie, a bird flies out of a window. Not 5 seconds later I hear the sound of a log or very large branch breaking on the other side of the building. Now it's so loud, and this tree must have been so huge that a large creature would have had to slam it directly into the other side of the building. I then pull out my pistol and walk quickly backwards facing the building as I told my girlfriend to walk quickly and get back to the car. So for my question for this whole mini stories, here's some facts about this place in general. Native used to live in this area back then. Black bears reportedly live in the area, though you don't really see them often. Now, there's a possibility that we come into contact with another human there. I think this is really unlikely though because of how loud the thing was when it crashed into the side of the building. I have read some stories about Appalachian folklore and wendigos and crawlers and such, so I'm not sure whether it was one of them. I'm just happy I had my gun with me at the time and I didn't have to find out what this was, because even if it was just a black bear we'd be in trouble. Now I was about 11, my sister was 13, and we slept in the living room of a little caravan we used to stay in near Stranraer. There wasn't a lot to do, the campsite didn't have any amenities. I'd pass the time by playing with my sister, and I would also take walks and play stands. This was 98, so Donkey Kong and stuff weren't really that nostalgic yet, they were just lame. I couldn't wait to go home and to get back on my PC so I could get my theme hospital on, but mostly I'd read. I had a collection of books about ghosts, UFOs, cryptids and such. I picked them up at a library sale or in charity shops. My favourite were just the unexplained true stories like the Dover Demon or Gulf Brens incident. There was a lot of quarry on the other side of the site. Sometimes I'd pretend to be two red lights and even pretend I was a Mothman, pretending I'd swoop down and terrorise my family. What I'm getting at here is I was a kid, but I never really believed in anything spooky happening to me. If something out of the ordinary was going to happen, I wouldn't really believe it. Now I woke up around 6:20, it's grey outside and the sun had just come up, but fog and cloudy skies ensured it wasn't too bright. I felt uneasy because I'd usually sleep till 9 at least. Now it was silent and my sister was even snoring as she usually did, and then I heard it. Two thud sounds. It sounds like a horse galloping. It's partially outside of my window. It was unsettling to say the least. Had a horse escaped from a nearby field? Surely not. I'd never seen any around here, and what's more, it didn't snow enough to be one. Now whatever it was making circles around the caravan. I'd hear a faint little sound as it looped around where my parents slept, and it would get louder, almost like next to my head. It had the irregular rhythm of a gallop, but I definitely never heard four legs, however. It sounded like a person skipping around really quickly, but nobody could be this heavy. Thud, thud, thud. It was fading off into the distance, and seems to have ran off, and I breathed a little easier. What a crazy situation. Maybe I hadn't fully woken up yet and was having a weird dream. And then it comes back, thud, 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 getting louder and more consistent. I decided to take my chances, saying to my sister, "Are you awake?" "Yeah," she said, quivering. "Can you hear it?" "Yeah, what is it?" "I don't know. I'm afraid to look out." "Why?" "I don't know what it is." She moaned in fear, hearing thud, 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 and there was a thump on the other side of the caravan, like whatever it was had grazed it. I pulled my blanket tightly over me. After about a minute it faded again, and I told myself I had to look outside, this has to be a demon. But it didn't come back. My parents woke up around 8 and made breakfast, and as the fog cleared, we said to them, "Have you heard anything strange?" And they haven't. There were no escapes on the caravan that would suggest something heavy went into it. Apart from my sister, there was no evidence that anything was ever there, except for one roof footprint outside of the door, shaped like a hoof. To this day, I regret never looking outside to see exactly what it was. Everything was so strange and I still don't understand why it happened. This happened over a year ago. Our oldest son, Camden, was 3 at the time, and our youngest son, Connor, was around 5 months old. It still gives me chills and still makes me uncomfortable even walking by it. It was January evening in PA. It was dark outside with a couple of inches of snow on the ground. We had just finished eating dinner, and I planned on giving our little one a bath. My husband drives trucks for work, so isn't home very often. It is me and the boys during the week. Now Caden's in his room playing with a toy at the time, and there's a sliding door leading to a deck. A little detail, we have no sensor or even porch light on that side of the house. At the time, we didn't use the deck at all, only to use our grill during the summer months. It is not close to the sidewalk or the next street over though, so basically it's an open space of yard off that deck. Anyway, Caden was playing in his room, waiting for his turn to have a bath while I brought Connor into the room. We were just about done with the bath time when I heard Caden's little feet running towards the bathroom. He stands away from the door and says, "Mum, there's a man looking in the side door. I think it's a mailman." Now my heart skips a beat because 1, no mailman's coming at 7 PM, and 2, the side door, as he called it, was never used. Especially not in the winter. I didn't hear a knock. I began to sketch myself out, more by thinking about how there's no light there, and one person is literally gonna have to walk through the yard in the snow, walk up the back stairs of the deck, and go to that door where the front porch light was on. So now I take Connor out of the bath, put him in a towel in his little chair, and told Caden to sit with his brother and not to come out until I said it was okay. He was confused but listens, just keeps asking what's wrong. I grabbed the biggest knife I can find, had 911 ready to call, and go get my mum a bare face on. When I walked to the side door, I shined the flashlight on my phone through the window of the door at a distance, walking up to it hopefully to scare someone away from it. Now the absolute worst fault that I have with this as a mother is that as I reach for the handle, it's unlocked. Someone could have walked right in. I flung the door open, shined my light, held up my knife and yelled "Hey!" in the most threatening voice a 5'4", 120-pound woman could make. There were footprints in the snow up the deck stairs and going down into the field and woods behind our home. I slammed the door, thoroughly freaked out, and locked it. I called the police and waited in the bathroom with the boys. While I was in there, I asked Caden, "Do you know who that man was?" And he said no, but he smiled and waved for a long time. I asked him what he was wearing. He said it looks like a mailman's uniform. The police officer came in search of property with flashlights before coming inside. He asked me and Caden questions, and then informed me that he not only saw footprints leading up to the side deck, but to the door of our basement and kitchen window on the other side. He then suggested that I have someone come and stay with us for the fortnight, and they're going to continue to follow the footprints that are left in the snow into the wood line. My father-in-law slept on the couch that night with his guns being the closest relative to our house. My mother was a nervous wreck. I got very little sleep that night, and I never heard back from the police. I'm assuming the tracks were loose through the woods. Caden still mentions it from time to time, but I'm just terrified of this now. I pray it never happens again. This happened a while ago, so my recollection can't be word for word, but here it is. I'm a teenager. Me and my mum live alone. We basically live in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town is a little less than an hour away, and even being close to a gas station is a very hard thing to find here. We're literally miles away from anything. I know everyone who lives near me, and we rarely ever see new people in our area of the woods. So just seeing someone who isn't familiar is suspicious enough. So this is pretty creepy. Now a couple of years ago, it's the middle of the night. Me and my mum are night owls. We like to be awake from midnight to 6 AM, the period that most people are asleep for. My mum was watching TV in the living room. I was using the computer in the kitchen. The kitchen and the living room are basically connected, so I wasn't too far away from her, only a few feet. The front door leads to the living room. It's a door with 9 windows, so it's pretty easy to see in. My mum looks towards the door, and she saw somebody staring at her through the window. He's wearing a hood that obstructed almost all of his face, and my mum jumped, and she of course walked into the door, asking him what the hell's he doing. According to my mum, he looked pretty young, but she could barely see his face. The man said something along the lines of, "Can you help my car please?" in a tone I can only describe as miserable and off-putting. Even though it was dark out, there should have been a light from the car. As you can see, there's no car, and the man's holding his pockets really tight. My mum said no and apologised, causing him to grip whatever's in his pocket even tighter. So tight it makes his arm tremble. He stayed for a few more minutes and then swiftly disappeared. Throughout the night, maybe 1 or 2 hours later, we'd hear slight weeping, but we didn't see anyone at any of our doors or windows. Now I may be making an assumption here, but I can only assume it was a weapon he was holding in his pocket. This was a creepy as hell experience. It's safe to say that he was blatantly gonna lure my mum out of the house to do God knows what to her. A year ago, there was a very small metal plate jammed between the front door strike plate and the piece that goes inside of it. We have no idea how this got here, but the metal stopped the doors from locking. So I'm assuming it was put there so someone can get in later. I'm worried these things are related. I hope this never happens again. I was home alone in my previous apartment in a not so great neighbourhood. My apartment was on the ground level and my bedrooms facing a back alley. A dumpster sat less than 2 car lengths away. Homeless people often rummage through it. Now just before dawn one morning, I hear a tapping on the window. My back was to the window, my eyes are now wide open. It's still dark outside, and I sleep with my lamp on, and my worn out vertical blinds are missing a slate, causing a gap. So now it's clear in my mind that whoever or whatever the source of the tapping could now see me lying in bed, plain as day. The tapping was brief, maybe 5 or 6 taps. So I spent the next 5 seconds or so frozen, bizarrely trying to convince myself it was something/anything else but a person watching me and tapping on my window. Please God, let it be an animal. But then, more tapping. Now I was faced with the terrifying reality that Someone had been watching me through my window in the dark for God knows how long, and he decided to tap on the window. Had one of the homeless people become aggressive during their dumpster dives? Something told me that nothing good was going to come from this. Now remember, my back was to the guy, so I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, pretending that I'm too groggy to hear him. I stand up hazily, made my way out of the bedroom as I was going to the bathroom or something. Once I was out of his sight, I ran to the phone and dialed 911, considering whether to forget my embarrassment of being in my t-shirt and underwear, and bolting out my front door, which is out of sight from the intruder. I just wasn't sure if I could outrun whoever it was, or whether anyone would help me if I couldn't. Before I make a decision, I hear a loud pop of my window being pried open. I thought my heart would jump through my chest. At the same time, I could hear my upstairs neighbour Mike descending down his stairs. I opened my door a few inches and peeked out to ask for his help. Mike's a big guy, and I heard he was trained in martial arts of some sorts. He didn't hesitate to respond, hustling to the back of my apartment to see what's going on. Within seconds, I heard rumbling and someone being thrown against a wall to the bushes. A few moments later, Mike came out to my front door telling me not to worry again. He'd beaten him up pretty bad. I wanted to believe Mike, that the would-be intruder was maybe dumpster diving, but that he would never do so again. But it gets worse. It wasn't a homeless person according to Mike. When the guy escaped, he ran to the front of my building, hopped into a red sports car and sped off. My neighbourhood isn't a red sports car kind of place. The police later told me that the intruder's likely someone who's seen me before and is stalking me. So window tapper, I still wonder what would have happened if you got inside and Mikey wasn't there to intervene. I don't know if you still follow me, and because of that, I'm scared. This encounter happened when I was about 10. My sister and I were home alone since it was during the summer. Both our mum and my grandmother were busy, so they could not stay at home with us. We were used to being home alone during the summer, so it's no big deal. The only thing we could do was not go outside or open the door to anyone. During this day, I had gotten up and started to play Sims 2 in our kitchen. My sister was watching TV in our den. A few hours into our game, I hear the doorbell ring. At first I thought it was my game, but I have the sound off. So I asked my sister if she heard the doorbell ring, and she replies she hasn't. She said it was probably just a show she was watching. I brushed it off and went back to my game. About 10 minutes later, I see a reflection on my computer of a man in a suit, his hands cupped around his eyes, looking through the glass door behind me. I turn around to be face to face with this strange man that I've never seen before. I had no idea how long he'd been there watching me. He waved at me like he knew me from somewhere. I call my sister's name, and the man hasn't been noticed by her yet. She grabs the phone quickly to call out to her grandmother. Now, we had seen the salesperson before. None of them look like this guy. He's wearing a full black suit that doesn't fit him. It was not strange enough that this guy was wearing a full suit in 99 degrees. He was also carrying a briefcase. All the salespeople I had seen only ever carried a clipboard and some flyers. but this guy, a briefcase. All the salespeople had also come at different times of the day. The next flag that came with this guy, he walked around our house coming to the back door, which during his little trip, you would have seen that there's not a car in the driveway, indicating no one's home. As I was getting up to hide, the man reaches down, grabbing the doorknob, beginning to jiggle it forcefully. Thank God it's locked. He now begins to smile, gesturing at me to come unlock the door for him. All the noise he had been making had now set off our 75-pound lab mix, making her go crazy. No way was she gonna let the guy off. My sister tells my grandmother, and apparently she's on her way. She wants us to hide in the back of her house until she could get home. My sister hands me the phone, then turns into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we have. I can hear her yelling at the guy that we called the cops. She comes back into the room and we shut the door. She tells me after she lied to the guy about calling the cops, but he starts laughing. A little while later, we hear the door open and my grandmother calling us. We come out to meet her. She tells us that she did not see a man anywhere in sight. She had walked around the whole house before unlocking the door. She also thought it was weird if he was a salesperson, he wouldn't have stayed around. She ended up taking the rest of the day off to be with us. Also, she could watch us now in case he comes back. It's been 11 years since this encounter took place and I still have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great and enjoyed these stories. If you want early access to my videos, then make sure you check out my Patreon, and make sure you check out the podcast in the description too. I do use social media, but the only one I use is Instagram, and my Instagram's Insomniac Horror. So sorry for the delay in getting this out. I actually had some big issues with my editing software where I tried to render the same video for about 3 or 4 days and it just wouldn't work for some reason, but I think the video was too long, but you live and learn. So I just have a quick message before the story starts, so if you want to go straight to the stories, and there's links in the description for that. So for today, really quick, I'd like to share this. When you're overcoming mental health issues, I think it's really important to plan and schedule actual rest days, because it can be very draining when you're overcoming these things, and you might constantly push yourself to do more and more, thinking it makes everything better in terms of being productive, because I know some people think if things are wrong then they need to be more productive to make it better, but it's very important to have rest days and have balance in your life, because imagine the stresses are pouring into a bucket, which is how much you can handle. If you don't give yourself rest days, then the bucket's going to slowly overflow, so just be careful with it and keep it in mind. It's a relatively simple concept, but I think it's something that can make a big difference, especially if you're someone who likes working all the time anyway, but it's just something I think people should consider. So I hope that makes a difference, and I hope everyone's doing great. I'll speak to you all soon. Now, I'm not much of a hunter, but when I was a teenager, I was always friends with stoners in high school, even though I wasn't one myself, and we'd always find the weirdest things to do. We lived in rural Mississippi, which I promise is not as horribly redneck as it seems, but we always heard the stories of the backwoods Satan church cult, you know, that whole legend that I guess you really hear a lot of when you're younger. So regardless, we actually got a lead once from one of our friends who used to go and smoke and fornicate at this particular spot in the middle of nowhere. They said they come across some weird animal skins and saw some people in weird garb walking around. So of course, we're gonna check it out. Our friends wouldn't go with us, so it was me and 2 girls and 3 guys. We drove out to the nearest trail and parked way out in the woods. Me and one of the other guys, along with one of the ladies, were a little chicken, worried about finding something awful, and we decided that we're gonna hike with our friends. After a good 10 minutes of walking blind through the woods, we can actually hear moans and screams. We've come across dead animals. It looked like some sicko hunters were just being disgusting with the animals and actually throwing their heads and whatnot around. They were mostly deer, but we found dogs even. This was more than enough for one of us to actually go back into the car. Of course, we ended up sitting in the car smoking cigarettes and just messing around until one of our friends returned. When they did come back, they were exhausted and had been running. Now, this was also before cell phones were capable of documenting everything, and none of us cared to bring one because we didn't have a decent camera on our one. All we got was a piece of cloth that my friend ripped off something. Anyways, when they get back to the car, they sped away and they drove us to our usual hangout spot and tell us what happened. They had walked for a good while and found this makeshift church with more dead animals everywhere. Apparently there was all kinds of symbols around and whatnot on it. They also heard awful noises, but my friend grabbed some scraps from one of the burnt areas of the building. It was one of the black jackets that our friend told us about stuck to the ground, like somebody had been pinned there before. The whole thing was weird and I didn't see it for myself, but I did see the animals, whether it be the sickos or hunters, but there really was a satanic church or something. The forest creeps me out to this day. Among other good stories, I have this one, but it really freaks me out. Now I've got 2 experiences really. The first happened when I was around 15 and was hunting squirrel in early October. It was a pretty cool day, and I was walking along in a hollow I'd hunted a few days prior, and had been there quite a few times looking at squirrels and whatnot. As I walked deeper into this hollow, I started seeing more and more squirrels and bagged a couple. As I'm watching a couple move around in the trees, waiting for one of them to stop on an open branch so I can take a shot at it, I'm totally focused on the 2 little animals jumping around and not paying much mind to anything else. Well, suddenly, the squirrels, all 6 or 7 I count, immediately disappear. Now this was weird enough in itself, since they all collectively made alarm barks, and then went silent and were nowhere to be seen. But what happened in the coming minutes has stayed with me for years. I stood looking around for any signs of squirrels, and I hear a loud crashing sound to my right. As I stood there, a figure emerges from the trees. The figure's walking on 2 legs and had a rather large frame. I think maybe it's my father when I saw it, as he was hunting with me that day. I realised that it was far too tall and not wearing any visible hat though. I looked for a good while at the form of it, and I decided it's a good idea to go a bit higher. Now based on the behaviour, I don't really know what to think of this. At first I was looking at what appeared to be a lost person, slowly scanning all the trees looking for some signs or something. But second, it remained on its hind legs and appeared to be far too comfortable on them, not even showing difficulty as it made its way down to the side of the ridge, unlike any bear I've seen. Now lastly, its form was, well, too human for it not to be a very large man, but I began to wonder, is this actually a person, and call out hello? And God, this lets out a horrible shrieking sound. 4. I call out for it again, but it bolts now, far quicker than anything I've ever seen run before. And its movement was truly graceful, which I found chilling. Now how easily large this thing was running was really weird. It had gone immediately to my 2 o'clock. It made me fear this thing, whatever it was, knowing it could easily hunt me down and capture me if it wanted. I quickly left the area and have only returned once since, this time during deer season and without my knowledge of where we'd end up. The second experience was when I was walking with my dog out in the field near my home. We both heard a bellowing roar from something I can't identify. The closest thing I can say about this is if you mixed a bear, wolf, and tiger. It was so terrifying that my dog immediately went to his house in the yard and stayed there the rest of the night. Now, I come from a big country family. We live on a farm. We raised our own food and animal meats, and we hunt and process. My father's cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead I grew up on and still live in, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife. Also, his 4 sisters are there, and my 4 female second cousins, so 4 adults and 9 kids. And sometimes my pop's brother actually comes over to stay with us, especially when the hunting season is starting up. So hunting season, which is deer hunting, is going on, and my pops and his brother and his cousin we live with are all getting ready to go hunting, and some of us decide to tag along with him, being me, my sister and cousin, and we go further into the woods than we normally do and set up camp, etc. Now, an important fact is that during the time we're setting up, my dad and uncles are being quiet while the kids are talking, and my voice hasn't changed. This is important. Now, us kids keep chattering away, while the adults are just letting us get our energy out while they check the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working, etc. There's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly, 3 creepy looking guys enter the clearing. They stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on a belt, and they're clearly drunk as anything. They keep looking at A and S at my pops and uncles like they're debating something. My pops and uncles stand up. Last bit of backstory. Every guy in my family is huge. I'm 19 now and am 6'5". My dad is 6'10", 280. Just a deeply intimidating man. And so are my uncles K and V. The guys laugh nervously as my uncle picks up one of the freshly cleaned rifles and points it at them. These dudes start running out the clearing like the devil's after them. My pops immediately says we're clearing out. My uncle doesn't question it, and neither do we, kids. We're freaking out and totally take things down sloppy, but my pops doesn't say anything about messing up the equipment. We get back into cell service and my dad calls the cops about seeing those creepy people, but the cops don't seem to think anything of it. At that moment I realised AS and me, with my voice unchanged, were the only ones those guys would have heard, so they thought they'd come across the camp with 3 people by themselves. I live in southern Spain, near some really ancient forest called Los Alcorones, which is some kind of trees that are almost extinct and only grow over there and in 1 or 2 other places. It's a bit of a rocky terrain, and if you like walking onto the forest and trying to climb some rocks, you should be careful because usually you can have caves and hollow spaces under your feet that you can really easily fall into. So my father and his friend usually go hiking on Thursdays so they don't find anyone in the woods, besides maybe a shepherd or forest worker. And on this day, they decide to climb a really large and rocky hill. My Uncle Frank remembered that when he was young, he slept on a little cave when he was hunting and got lost, and he wanted to try and find it again. After a few hours they find the cave. The cave itself is covered in moss and grime, but it was surely the same cave. One of my father's friends, John, tried to get as far as possible into the cave because he was in really good shape and wants to see all of it. The rest of them decide to wait outside. Now suddenly, John starts screaming and calling for my father. He went inside and turned on his torch, and inside the cave was a really weird shrine or something like that with candles, apples, bones, and charcoal and ashes, a pair of gloves, a pot and a pan. Everything looks really old and dusty like it's been there for a long time. My father went to the shrine and it had a little bowl, and in it appeared to be human teeth. When they got out, they packed up all of their things and go really quickly. My father actually refuses to hike around there anymore, and they start hiking on the other side of the hill and into the woods. Now, I was prospecting in the outback of Queensland one day, and I'm around 100k from anywhere and the sun is beginning to set. I am setting up camp by a billabong when something catches my eye up in the ghost gum by my tent, about 30 feet up, in the crook of two branches is a tray. On the tray there appears to be a full bottle of red wine and a glass. It's perfectly balanced, like it's been placed there for me. The base of the tree was about 3 meters wide without a branch, knot or handhold all the way up to the tree, so I never got close to work out why or how it got up there. I live in Northeast America, in a pretty rural place with lots of hills, not too many neighbours and a lot of forest. Just tonight I was heading somewhere with my mother down our backyard, which is pretty large and relatively clear for about 100 foot, then switched to some woods. Now we're about 30 foot before the woods when I catch a sight of some eyes reflecting in my headlamp. They're a good 50 to 100 feet away, and I assume they're just deers. There's a couple of things that convince me, however, that they might not be just deer. Around where I live, deer will run away if you make enough noise, and we were talking pretty loud, but the eyes don't move. They were staring directly at us and continue to do so, which is incredibly unlike deer. On top of that, the pair of eyes on the right are very low to the ground and very wide, too far apart to be a deer, more something predatory and big. We stood for a minute remarking on them, and neither pair of eyes looked away. So since we were spooked, we headed back up to the house, got my brother a machete, a bat and a metal pole, and head down. I expected the eyes to be gone by that point, but no. They were still there in slightly different spots, but not much further from where they'd been previously. They just stared as steadily as though they'd been there forever, and we retreat back. The logical answer is a deer, but the lack of running away, the height and the intense stare, almost feels like it couldn't possibly be deers. Now it could be wild dogs, but we don't really have them here. It's possibly a black bear, but they're notoriously scared of people. A few years ago, in the northern parts of Sweden, I'm going out for a very nice evening of fishing. I am what I guess is called a fishing supervisor. I check that the other fishermen get their licenses in a certain area of lakes and streams. This is in late summer, so I've been doing my round, which is usually ending up with going to a small lake and fly fishing for some trout. Now this lake or pond is pretty deep in the forest and I rarely see anybody out here. Actually, I've never met anyone here. The lake looks like a crater, a perfectly round circle that's perhaps 100 meters in diameter. It contains a natural population of perch and trout. It's a summer evening with a light breeze. The birds are chirping and the fish is rising to all the insects spawning on the surface. I rig my gear and aim for one of the fish rising near the right of me. The second as my fly lands onto the surface, it's like somebody pauses time. The sun hides behind a cloud, the wind stops blowing and the birds are suddenly silent and the fish stop eating. A smell rises from the ground that I'm standing on, like something dead and rotten. It's almost like there's a carcass really far under my feet. Now all of a sudden I'm aware that there is something walking out of the forest maybe like 15 or 10 meters behind me. It's like I can see it in the corner of my eye, but I still really can't see it, and every hair on my body stands on end. It suddenly becomes very cold all around me. The thing watching me just stands there, and I don't have the courage to turn around at all. I see my fly sink to the bottom, but I can't move. I can't do anything. I don't dare to. Then suddenly the wind hits me and it carries away the awful smell, and the sun shines again and hits me. The birds are now singing again, and the forest comes back to life. I turn around and nothing's there. So on the lake I start fishing again. I pack my gear and throw the backpack on my back and run for it, through the forest to my car. I hit the gas and drive like a maniac until I find the big road and civilization once again. I park at the side of the road and say to myself, what was that? And I haven't been there since. I'm a wildland fighter in the US. I fought fires all over the Northwest, Eastern Rockies, Midwest forest, and the only thing that's ever thrown me off was fighting fires in the mountains of Wyoming, BLM land of east of Yellowstone, hiking into a valley recently burnt that was just eerie. Smoke can make that a norm, but the colours were so vibrant. Even after being touched by fire, most of the trees and shrubs were unburnt, which is very rare or almost impossible. Now within a few steps of entering the base of the valley, I knew the details like I'd lived there my whole life, like deja vu, but with a clarity of reality and not a momentary second but 20 minutes and 100 yards of hiking. To be clear, this was a place that I'd never stopped in before, and I was hiking paths that were very familiar to me as a brother. Trees I knew had scars opposite of me 20 yards away, stones that I knew were going to be warm, almost hot to touch really, perched inches from an ice cold stream. Before I turned corners, I knew about a rock shelf that was protecting a small pool with a lush green patch of grass the size of a small room with untouched trees. Now, I stayed there for a moment, but it felt like an hour. The whole time my hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I felt like I was visiting my favourite place in the world. Now anyway, I finished scouting the valley and went back with my crew to move on. I kept saying to myself that I don't know how to explain this perfect place and I want to leave it for myself. It still shocked me to this day. I have no way to rationalize exactly why it was so perfect despite the massive fires everywhere else. To this day, 4 years and countless fires later, I've never experienced anything like it, and it's likely the only place that I've ever desired beyond to any to return again. It just seemed too perfect and out of this world. A long time ago, a few friends and I decided to go camping. We live in a rural area, so we just pick a random stretch of woods that wasn't around someone's home. We're talking really rural, like cornfields on both sides a few miles apart, and then nothing but uninterrupted empty forest until you hit the road, which is a long way off. We hiked about 3 miles in before we made camp. Later on in the middle of the night, we got freaked out and decided that camping in a random forest isn't good. So we hike probably 5 miles back to the road because we somehow got into one of the cornfields and those absolutely suck. Miles of roads where you can't see anything and not being able to see your friends to your left or right really scares you. Now, not to mention that the reason we decided to go back to the car in the first place is because we heard random rustling around us the whole night, which followed us until the last 20 feet before the road. Now that's not the scariest part. The next day when we went back to get our stuff, now in the day the forests are a lot better really, so it was a nice walk. And we start walking and talking a bit. During that, one of us yelled Marco, and unfortunately somebody answered. Like I said, much less creepy in the daytime. Now feeling comfortable, we kept playing and tried to find out the presumed hunter or hiker who was messing with us. Eventually, we realised that this never stops, and we don't know the direction that it actually comes in. So we keep heading out eventually, not thinking more of it, until one of my friends decides to do it again and we get replies. We end up following it until we get to an old, mostly crumbled barbed wire fence surrounding the foundation of a house that used to be there. This was not uncommon in the forest where I grew up. There were lots of houses that had been built and then neglected when their owners sold their land to farmers and moved away, but the fact that playing Marco Polo with an apparent disembodied voice had led us to this weird place. Our tent was still in the forest, but we decided to leave it there. Now, I like to look for new, out-of-the-way fishing holes. If I'm on a trip and I have my gear, I'll pull up a map, look at different connecting waterways and try and find back roads that may lead to spots that few people know about. On one particular trip about 10 years ago, I'm in Western PA and looking for a road to connect me with this small and out-of-the-way stream that I found on the map. I'm in the country and it's not too desolate, but houses are definitely getting few and far between and it's looking more and more beat up. I summarise that I'm really close to where this stream is supposed to be, so I turn down a dirt road. It leads towards a tree line in the direction that I believe the stream is in. The road starts out okay, but as soon as I pass into the tree line stuff, things get weird. It's mid-afternoon, but the canopy of the tree is so thick that it suddenly looks like dusk. Then, the road becomes very, very dodgy quick, starting to close in and then vanishes. There are banks on either side of me, so I feel like I'm on some sort of old logging road that rarely ever gets vehicles on it. The road is getting worse and worse. Large rocks starting to appear randomly in the road, first radically and then more frequently. It's very unnatural looking. It looks like they were placed there on purpose. Now my car's a 4-wheel drive, but I'm getting a little worried because the rocks are getting large, and combine this with how tight the road is, and now driving around them is becoming sketchy. I'm now driving very slow, to not pop a tyre or make a wrong move and get stuck on the bank or something. The road suddenly takes a very sharp left hand and downward turn. I creep along this turn, but as soon as I see the road continue in this weird trajectory, I have a feeling that something's bad. My gut starts talking to me and telling me turn around, but at this point, I realise I can't now. The car is not wide enough to do a 3-point turn. I could chance it, but I didn't want to get my front end caught on something pushed over the bank or my back end going off the back into the other direction. I say to myself, just keep pushing forward, and you are bound to get enough room to turn around shortly. As I make my way driving this weird downward road with sharp curves and oddly placed rocks, I start to see items off to the side of the road. At first, it's just garbage, bottles, boxes, wraps, etc. Then I start to see toys, like kids' toys and lots of them, an uncomfortable amount. I then start seeing clothes, some old and weathered and tattered like they've been there for years, but some are fairly new. The amount of clothes I'm seeing also increases. Then, I start seeing mattresses, not at random, but lots of them all over the place with dirty stains on them. My gut really begins screaming at me to get out of there, but I still don't have the room to turn around. While I'm sitting there trying to figure out what my next move is, I get the distinct feeling that I'm being watched. The moment that feeling hits me, I audibly yell at myself, no. Then I slam the car in reverse and drive reverse dodging all the random rocks and all the way back up and out the sharp turns until the path levels out again. I go into full I need to get out of here mode and quickly slam the car into reverse, doing a 3-point turn. My back end goes slightly off the bank as I slam back into drive and pound the gas to throw myself back onto the road and out of whatever dark woods I've discovered. I have no clue what I come across that day. Best case scenario was probably some weird people deep in the woods with some dodgy den, but I don't know. I'm just glad I trusted my gut and actually escaped from the situation. The first story is when I met my wife 10 years ago. We're 17, and I was a hunting nut, deciding to go camping in the sand dunes behind my suburb, just off the beach. We live in Brest, rural Australia, so nothing really happens. Anyway, pretty local area, lots of people around. We decide to just hang around the beach, go walking and settle down for the night. A couple of hours passed and we had a small campfire going. We then jump into our sleeping bag and go to sleep. I'm then awoken to thudding all around us and a grok 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 noise. Okay, it freaked us out, especially because I was half asleep. Turned out it was an emo that stood on us, and honestly, the big fella was so shocked and took off. We think it's really odd but decide to sleep again. But then we realise there's people everywhere. They walk past us and we didn't see them though. They're not actually talking, we can just hear them walking. They eventually break into a run and start laughing. We heard them run over the dunes to the seaside and then chanting. People weren't off their head or doing anything like they're loving it. It's almost like somebody was getting chased and the people chasing them were really enjoying it. It's really hard to describe. There was a group of people running up and down the trail around us that wouldn't stop chanting at this point. I called my partner's parents and they came with their Rottweiler and guns to pick us up. We walked back to the parking lot and eventually go back to the main trail. We can still hear people running out of the darkness behind us laughing and screaming, some of them taunting us to come back over the dunes. We never figured out what it was, but it wasn't the local Aboriginal people, and if it wasn't the local meth heads, we don't know who it was. But it was at least 50 people at around 3 AM. Now for my second story. We were homeless for a while at around 20. We rescued mastiffs and I had an opportunity to train in the Melbourne and represent a gym for MMA. We drove across the Nullarbor with our 3 dogs and my wife's mother. Halfway across we got tired and saw some dilapidated road stop. It was just some younger woman's house and a shop attached. We pulled up and talked to the female owner and an older bloke. They looked at us and asked if we were tired. I said yeah, and they asked us if we wanted to drive back, and we say sure. We stopped for a rest because the folks seemed nice. We drove around back to a car park equivalent of car bodies. Okay, that's odd already because the nearest town is like a day's drive. Anyway, one of our dogs is unwell and needed a strict diet to go to the bathroom regularly. I get her out of the car and the other dogs jump out too. The Rottweiler takes off to explore. The dog goes out and I call her back. No response. That's pretty normal, she's ignorant sometimes. I get out to look for her and she's sniffing in a sleeping bag. Alright, fine. But this place is absolutely wrecked. I don't give it a second thought. I then looked up and see a massive tarp wrapped up around something, which is strung up through some trees, completely suspended, and behind it a few sleeping bags suspended again, about 10 in all. Then I noticed the absolute swarm of flies. I got the dogs back into the car, saw the woman and the bloke on the way out, wave at them and act normal. Nothing, no wave or smile. All the former charm is gone. We didn't ever report it because we honestly had no idea where it was. We just kept heading east to the biggest road we can find. And eventually we make it out of there. Now I'd like to give you some information before my story starts. I was a park ranger and I'd only been doing the job for a couple of months, and I had one experience that still stays with me now, even years after doing the service. Now, I would often operate alone. This is something I didn't really have an issue with because sometimes I like the serenity of everything. Especially during winter months, I found the forest really beautiful out on my own. But hey, each to their own I guess. Some of my friends think it's weird and I can understand that really. Now, one particular day we had a call out for a missing person. Apparently there was somebody going through the forest wearing all white, and whenever somebody tried calling out for them they would run off. Now, worried somebody had fell and hit their head, I was convinced that it was just a young hiker who had got lost, so I'm happy to go and investigate and oblige. Now, at the time I set out, the sun's still shining and everywhere's beautiful and life's pretty good. I was confident that I was going to find this person, especially because at this point it was early on in my career. I had no doubt in my mind that I was going to find them and maybe get some credit for doing it. So I set out. Now as I set out, I realised that it's actually colder than I realised, so I quickly head in to grab a jumper. And I'm not joking, the second I got back out from my tower, I can see somebody running off, just vaguely in the distance wearing white. I presume it's my mind playing tricks on me, but I remember the description, so call out. I end up chasing after this person and they're just about running off ahead of me. It's pretty difficult to make out much else because they're moving so quick, but my god, could this person run? They run like an Olympic athlete, and honestly I struggled for a long time to actually catch up with them. To be honest, it actually really annoyed me after a while because I'm not gonna lie, I was getting out of breath, but I decided I should continue onward anyway. Now they were leading me deeper and deeper and into the forest, but at the time I wasn't too worried about this because it's somewhere that I knew relatively well, but I knew at some point I was going to get out of an area where I knew and I'd probably be in the middle of nowhere, but hey, I have to keep going, it's a part of the job. I radio in what's happening, they say yeah fine, just keep going. They want me to capture this person. Now at this point it starts to get relatively dark because of the time of day, and we're basically walking. Well, I wouldn't say it's exactly a walk. It's relatively quick but not too quick. Now I don't understand how this person can see where they're going because I can't see anything right now. I stop for a second to catch my breath and I do see a strange orb of light moving across in front of me to my right that I've not really seen anything like since. I presume it's maybe a firefly or something and continue on. I keep calling out but this person does not stop. We end up making it into an area of the forest I'm completely unfamiliar with, but I was so focused on tracking this person down that it does not bother me and I keep going. Now I look to my left and I swear to myself, the rocks are extremely jagged and I nearly walked straight into this pit thing. I just hate the thought of the spiders and bugs that could be down there. I end up walking over some rocks that leads to a slight hill. I decide that I must find this person and I'm kind of blind to the danger that I'm in. I've just run out into pretty much the middle of nowhere trying to find someone and it's getting dark. I don't really have much backup because I don't know where I am. I mean heck, maybe I'll end up on the missing persons list if I'm not careful. But I must press on and that's exactly what I do. I continue going deeper into the forest and I have no sign of this person now. One strange thing I realise is when I turn a corner, looking in a general direction that I think they've went, the trees suddenly have more life to them. It's almost like the trees are much greener here and it's silent. It's something that I think is rather bizarre because you'd presume there'd be more insects and whatnot on the trees, but I can't really hear anything. But to be entirely honest, it's probably from my fear more than anything that this has happened. I continue on and I see a large building in the distance. I think this is odd because there shouldn't be anything out of here. This thing's been here for a while and I have to find out what it is. I continue going through the clearing and there it is. It's a pretty nice building. It appears to be an old Nordic style church almost, which is completely black. I think that's odd, and breaking up the darkness is that white figure at the top. I call out again and it just pops down out of view. This time I'm a little hesitant, but I must figure out what this is and I must go and help. So I rush in there. At first I try and go through the main entrance but there's no way in. Then I realise that if I head just under to the side, I can kind of creep my way round. I ended up crawling under some kind of underpass thing. Not exactly a cellar, but it leads me to where I need to go. I ended up making it through a clearing and I turn on my torch again and my god, it's beautiful. It's what appears to be an old abandoned church, literally in the middle of nowhere. I've never seen anything like it. I'd have to say it's at least 200 years old if I guessed, and it's all entirely made out of wood. There's no stone or anything here, and as I flick on my light, I can hear an echo sound all around me. I can see that thing again just off ahead, and suddenly it hits me. Something's deeply wrong. None of this makes sense. I shouldn't have been chasing whatever this is out of here, because God knows what's actually in here. Am I alone, or is it just this person, and why have they not responded to me? I say, God, you're so stupid, under my breath, and I hear a shush sound behind me. Terrified, I dart round quickly, and I can't see anyone. I say, who's there, with my voice shaking, and now there's a whisper in my ear saying, you shouldn't have come here. And I can hear some laughter. It's not a loud laughing, almost like a child who's done something wrong, but there must be at least 10 or 12 of them all laughing simultaneously. I drop the torch and quickly stumble back to where I've come from and make it into the clearing again and quickly go through the small tunnel. What's worse is I can feel an insect or animal drop onto my head. I brush it off to the side and quickly realise it's a big cobweb. God, I hate spiders so much. I'm not sure what I can hear behind me, whether it's a giant spider or them, but something's following me. I eventually make it out again and I don't bother looking behind me. I sprint and eventually I make it back to an area of the forest that I actually know. Now I'm so scared by this point that I don't bother to radio in anything. I continue on the path that I know, not even bothering looking behind me, and I make it back in record time. I eventually get back to the station. I frantically radio in what's happened, and you know the worst part? No one believed me. Not a soul or person. They say, if you can't find it then just tell us, don't make up some rubbish like this. And then I'm met by silence. I can't believe what's just happened. I tell them again and they don't even reply this time. I'm so frustrated because I don't know what happened. I don't bother making a police report because I know I'm probably going to lose my job, but all I know is there's some psychopaths out there who are in some kind of old church building trying to lure in people like me, but the fact that they lured someone in there in full uniform shows that they're completely different to anyone else I've dealt with. The only other thing it could be is something paranormal, but I don't believe that. I ended up quitting working in that area literally the following day. Well, I should say it was a sleepless night and it felt like the whole day had merged into one, but God, I really have never felt fear like it, and I actually get shudders even thinking of it now. I just wish there was more people to see it there with me. Now, I'm not much of a hunter, but when I was a teenager, I was always friends with stoners in high school, even though I wasn't one myself, and we'd always find the weirdest things to do. We lived in rural Mississippi, which I promise is not as horribly redneck as it seems, but we always heard the stories of the backwoods Satan church cult. You know, that whole legend that I guess you really hear a lot of when you're younger. So regardless, we actually got a lead once from one of our friends who used to go and smoke and fornicate at this particular spot in the middle of nowhere. They said they come across some weird animal skins and saw some people in weird garb walking around. So of course, we're gonna check it out. Our friends wouldn't go with us, so it was me and 2 girls and 3 guys. We drove out to the nearest trail and parked way out in the woods. Me and one of the other guys, along with one of the ladies, were a little chicken, worried about finding something awful, and we decided that we're gonna hike with our friends. After a good 10 minutes of walking blind through the woods, we can actually hear moans and screams. We've come across dead animals. It looked like some sicko hunters were just being disgusting with the animals and actually throwing their heads and whatnot around. They were mostly deer, but we found dogs even. This was more than enough for one of us to actually go back into the car. Of course, We ended up sitting in the car smoking cigarettes and just messing around until one of our friends returned. When they did come back, they were exhausted and had been running. Now, this was also before cell phones were capable of documenting everything, and none of us cared to bring one because we didn't have a decent camera on our one. All we got was a piece of cloth that my friend ripped off something. Anyways, when they get back to the car, they sped away and they drove us to our usual hangout spot and tell us what happened. They had walked for a good while and found this makeshift church with more dead animals everywhere. Apparently there was all kinds of symbols around and whatnot on it. They also heard awful noises, but my friend grabbed some scraps from one of the burnt areas of the building. It was one of the black jackets that our friend told us about stuck to the ground, like somebody had been pinned there before. The whole thing was weird and I didn't see it for myself, but I did see the animals, whether it be the sickos or hunters, but there really was a satanic church or something. The forest creeps me out to this day. Among other good stories, I have this one, but it really freaks me out. The first story is when I met my wife 10 years ago. We're 17, and I was a hunting nut, deciding to go camping in the sand dunes behind my suburb, just off the beach. We live in Brest, rural Australia, so nothing really happens. Anyway, pretty local area, lots of people around. We decided to just hang around the beach, go walking and settle down for the night. A couple of hours passed and we had a small campfire going. We then jump into our sleeping bag and go to sleep. I'm then awoken to thudding all around us and a grok 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 noise. Okay, it freaked us out, especially because I was half asleep. Turned out it was an emo that stood on us, and honestly, the big fella was so shocked and took off. We think it's really odd but decide to sleep again. But then we realise there's people everywhere. They walk past us and we didn't see them though. They're not actually talking, we can just hear them walking. They eventually break into a run and start laughing. We heard them run over the dunes to the seaside and then chanting. People weren't off their head or doing anything like they're loving it. It's almost like somebody was getting chased and the people chasing them were really enjoying it. It's really hard to describe. There was a group of people running up and down the trail around us that wouldn't stop chanting at this point. I called my partner's parents and they came with their Rottweiler and guns to pick us up. We walked back to the parking lot and eventually go back to the main trail. We can still hear people running out of the darkness behind us laughing and screaming, some of them taunting us to come back over the dunes. We never figured out what it was, but it wasn't the local Aboriginal people, and if it wasn't the local meth heads, we don't know who it was. But it was at least 50 people at around 3 AM. Now for my second story. We were homeless for a while at around 20. We rescued mastiffs and I had an opportunity to train in the Melbourne and represent a gym for MMA. We drove across a Nullarbor with our 3 dogs and my wife's mother. Halfway across we got tired and saw some dilapidated road stop. It was just some younger woman's house and a shop attached. We pulled up and talked to the female owner and an older bloke. They looked at us and asked if we were tired. I said yeah, and they asked us if we wanted to drive back, and we say sure. We stopped for a rest because the folks seemed nice. We drove around back to a car park equivalent of car bodies. Okay, that's odd already because the nearest town is like a day's drive. Anyway, one of our dogs is unwell and needed a strict diet to go to the bathroom regularly. I get her out of the car and the other dogs jump out too. The Rottweiler takes off to explore. The dog goes out and I call her back. No response. That's pretty normal, she's ignorant sometimes. I get out to look for her and she's sniffing in a sleeping bag. Alright, fine. But this place is absolutely wrecked. I don't give it a second thought. I then looked up and see a massive tarp wrapped up around something, which is strung up through some trees, completely suspended, and behind it a few sleeping bags suspended again, about 10 in all. Then I noticed the absolute swarm of flies. I got the dogs back into the car, saw the woman and the bloke on the way out, wave at them and act normal. Nothing. Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. I've recently changed my setup, so this is the very first video that I'm making entirely on it, so I'm really excited about that. Thank you for all the positive comments recently, I really appreciate it. Make sure you check out my Patreon for early access, and make sure you check out the podcast in the description. And I do use Instagram at Insomniac Horror. Let me know what kind of stories you enjoyed the most in this video too. And I did actually have a strange experience a few days ago that I'm gonna post in a separate video that I think you will be interested by. I do believe in things out there, but this kind of made me change my mind, so I've got that coming soon. So I hope everybody's doing great, and remember that you're special and important, and take time to do the things you enjoy and just relax a little bit. I think it's really important, and sometimes we get too caught up in trying to do things, and sometimes we can let our heads run away with the wind, but it's important just to take time to stop and appreciate you. So I hope everybody's doing great and enjoys these stories. I'll talk to you all soon. One of the weirdest things that happened to me was during one winter near my house. Now, the property that I live on was actually a very old one that my grandparents used to own, and I'd always remember my grandpa telling me weird stories about how sometimes he would see faces out in the woods. I never really took him too seriously, to be honest, and I thought maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But one day I had an experience I truly can't explain. It was close to nightfall, and I kept on hearing a ringing sound outside. It sounded like a ringing in my ears, but it wasn't from my head. I decided I have to go out and see what's going on in case there's going to be an electrical fire or something. I was actually pretty paranoid of that at the time. As I got outside, I realised that the sound seems to be coming from all directions, and is something that I've never heard before or since. I think this is really odd, and I look around at what appears to be a large sheet of ice near a tree. I stare at it until I realise that this is where the sound's coming from, but it seems to be moving. Now I kid you not, there seemed to be a completely transparent sheet of ice that was moving, that looked just like a human. It then puts its hand towards where its mouth should be, and then slowly walks off into the forest, and the noise immediately stops. I very quickly hurried inside, and I tell my mom about what happened, and she tells me that my grandpa used to report seeing these things all the time, and he even had a name for it because he'd see it so frequently. And my mom was actually quite concerned because she too had heard the ringing sound before but never went out to investigate. I've heard the sound since, but I've never been brave enough to go outside again to find out exactly what it is. Not long ago, my brother was telling my mum about something my dad had said to him quite a few years ago that always puzzled him. My dad passed away about 10 years ago, so I can't ask him about it, but it bugs me that I can't get more information. My dad loved being in the woods. They were like a second home to him. Whenever we'd taken a family trip into the woods, I could ask him what any animal sound was that I heard in the area, and he would tell me exactly what animal was making it, and any other details I asked about. He grew up on a farm and spent time as a forest ranger working in fire towers, and he enjoyed hunting, so he knew nature pretty well. The woods that he would take my family trips to were ones that he was very familiar with, as some of the fire towers where he worked were still standing in that area. My brother said that there was a weekend that my dad decided to take a trip to the woods by himself to do some small game hunting. Not unusual for him at all. The strange part was that my dad came home early from where we lived at the time. Now it took 2.5 hours, and sometimes longer depending on traffic, to get to the woods he likes. He didn't spend the night, even though he had brought everything he needed to camp for 2 nights. Now both my mum and my brother remembered him coming home early. Only my dad never mentioned to my mum why, and only let it slip to my brother once. My dad mentioned that he heard something make a sound in the woods, a sound that he never heard in his life. He knew it wasn't from any of the animals in the woods. The sound made him pack up and head home during the night. My brother tried to press him for more details, but he quickly changed the subject and said he never wanted to discuss it again. He never described what type of sound it was. He just said he knew it wasn't from an animal that should have been there, or could have been there, and my dad was never easily spooked, especially not by nature. Whatever he heard, we have no idea, but it sure got to him. It eats me to think that I can't really find out exactly what happened. My brothers still take trips to those woods, and they've never heard anything out of the ordinary while out there. Now, I'm one of those people that can only really relax when I'm in nature, and luckily for me, I lived in an area that was very close to nature. Having been a forest ranger before, I guess I was really at one with nature and found peace in myself out there, so I didn't mind going during some gloomy mornings or during the winter months. I actually preferred it in some ways, to be honest. So I'd set out on one of these walks, just like the thousands I had before probably. I'd clocked up hundreds of miles in forest just from walking, and not only on my job. Now, I wasn't actually on duty during this particular day. Now, if I said it wasn't cold out, I would be lying. There was actually frost all over the floor, which made it look really cool, I thought. But to some people this might be a bad thing, but I don't know. I'm walking through an area of forest that has really nice tall trees. They're pretty bare at the bottom but have some leaves on the top and some leaves on the floor. I liked being able to walk through, especially at times like this when there was mist. It looked like the start of a horror movie, or maybe a Halloween movie, but I guess they're the same thing. But to give you a picture, the trees look almost black. There's an overcast so you can't really see the sun, and there's frost all over the floor and some water dripping from the trees. Again, to some people I'd understand why they might not like it, but to me, it was beautiful. So I begin on my walk like normal, and I've realised it is actually quite cold, so I decide I probably shouldn't stop and should just keep going, because that's when you get cold, when you stop moving. And where water kept falling onto my head, it was actually making me a little bit wet, and that's the easiest way to lose body heat. Now, I'm having a really good time on my walk, and I eventually make it through into a clearing where the trees change and there's relatively tall grass. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Scotland, but it kind of looks like some of the forests in there, and I thought this was really beautiful. Now, as I'm going along my way, I keep on catching some strange movement on the mossy rocks. It's really hard to describe, but it almost looks like every so often I see something move. Kind of like there's a lag in my vision, but there's literally nothing wrong with my vision because I have eyes that are perfectly good. I think maybe it's just my brain going a bit funny, so I decide to keep going. Now I'm following an old wall which is really beautiful and has more of this moss on it. Now I can't actually see very far ahead of me because the fog is quite thick now. It's slowly getting darker, but I know roughly where I am, so I haven't got anything to worry about really. I decide I need to make it away from the moss and get to an area that I know better. I can hear a faint moaning in the distance through the fog where I can't actually see. It's bizarre because it doesn't sound like any of the animals that I've encountered before or anything that you'd usually expect to find out here. And I also can't see it. There's just fog everywhere. It also gives a nice silence to the forest, well, except for this sound. It's a very deep kind of moan, but more aggressive if that makes sense. I think this is strange, but I think it could just be some animal I've not really encountered before and continue onwards. I decide that I should probably try and get to some high ground and make my way back to where I can return to my car easily because it is really cold, so I continue walking. I'm off the trail now, just going through the grassy stuff. Now it's actually quite annoying because every time I'm walking there are trees that have kind of fallen or where the branches are low, so I have to keep ducking under them. I continue making my way when I realise that one of the rocks looks like it's moving. It's a large green moss covered one and it seems like it's just sliding down but not making any sounds. I stop and stare at it until it slowly goes off into the fog where I can't see it now. I think this is really bizarre. It appears like it almost stands up to the height of a human man and slowly kind of moves along like it's got parts of it that aren't fully connected. You know how if you move a mop, kind of like that, like detached but joined at the same time. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little worried at this point. It literally looks like someone in a ghillie suit, or maybe like a sniper suit. I try and get closer to it, but it disappears over the hill. I figured out what's happened now. Somebody is hunting in a ghillie suit but hasn't told anyone. Well, not me at least. I actually get a bit angry at this point because that's actually really dangerous for me, because they could easily mistake me for something in the fog and take a shot at me. And guess what? There's not meant to be hunters here. At least I know what was making those creepy sounds earlier. I move further along and I can see more of the moss covered rocks. It looks just like whatever this person is, and as I stop for a few minutes, I can hear the sound again, this time closer, like a deep moaning sound. I look off and once again, I can see this thing. It looks like it's crouched down with its head down against a tree, moving very slightly forwards and backwards. I then notice to the left of it, there seems to be another person in a ghillie suit doing exactly the same thing. I think this is really odd. It just looks like big moss covered people moving, almost in distress. Now I call out and say, hey, you need to stop this. You're really scaring me and you're not meant to be hunting here. Then there's silence. One of these things stands up and just stares at me. I say stare because I can't really see its eyes, but this thing's tall. It's probably 6 feet at least, and it's not moving now. The other one's doing the same. At this moment, I'm starting to really doubt whether this is actually a person messing around with me or not. Or maybe some deranged crazy person, I don't know. And then I hear the sound again. It's definitely coming from whatever these things are, and they start slowly moving towards me. Not very quick, almost like limping towards me, but something's just so off about it. I think maybe it's people trying to scare me off, so I stand my ground. Well, that lasts for about 2 seconds before I get a gut feeling that I shouldn't really be here right now. I turn around and start making a quick walk away. I know if I walk quickly I can probably escape whatever this is, but I don't want to run and hurt myself on a rock. I turn around and I can't see too far because of the fog. I do this for a good few minutes and realise that this thing is keeping pace with me pretty nicely. I then make my way to even more of the moss covered rocks, and I get a weird feeling that something just isn't right. I feel like I'm in something's home and I'm not meant to be, and in all my years of being a ranger I've never seen a creature like this. It really looks like a weird swamp creature, but not. I don't know, it just should not be out in the forest. Now, I've heard stories from other rangers about this area having tribes that used to live here that would do all kinds of rituals, and they would describe some kind of night creatures, but these were completely different. The thing that had been described to us was much taller, almost like a giant pencil that would walk along slowly, but similarly, this thing would actually go in pairs or groups, so I don't know, maybe this was a winter variant I was seeing. No, stop. My mind's playing tricks on me. This can't be real. I continue going, and the fog's actually relatively annoying now. It's kind of making me feel like there's too much moisture everywhere, though I guess that's what it is. I continue until eventually I'm on a path again and I pick up the pace. I manage to make it towards trees that are actually a lot easier to move through, and the path is straight. I stop and take a moment to question my own sanity. What are these things? What did I just see? And sure enough, one of them catches up with me. I can just about make a silhouette out in the background, and sure enough, it's slowly coming towards me. I scream, "Hey, I'm a park ranger and you better stop or you're going to be in some real trouble." The thing keeps moving, and I can just feel water dripping onto my head from some of the trees. I decide that I have to sprint now. I actually fall instantly and I feel like I'm gonna faint. I don't know whether I can get up again. My leg feels really weird, but thankfully it was just some of the water from the moisture that's in the air, and I was completely fine. I get up and start sprinting through the forest and eventually make it back to where my car is parked. Annoyingly, I have to spend about another 2 minutes trying to get the moisture and condensation off of my car before I can actually start it up to get out of there. Before I go, I look around quickly, not before locking the doors, and I can't see anything. Just the very start of the tree line where the forest is. I don't see any more movement this time. Now I want to say that I reported this and made a big report, but I couldn't. I knew I'd probably lose my job if I did, or at least I would question my sanity and reputation. Now, I don't really believe in Sasquatches or any of them kind of things, but I know this thing wasn't a bear, and I'm almost certain it wasn't a person. A person wouldn't be out in the forest for that long, that cold, and why would they be stalking me, specifically me? I announced that I was a ranger, and I told them that they weren't supposed to be hunting there, but they were following me. Maybe it was me that was being hunted the whole time. I just don't know exactly by what, and it haunts me to this day. I never went back to that area again. I'm not a ranger, but I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, so we spent a lot of time in the woods, and some weird stuff happened there, but usually it was easy to explain. One of the things that happened scared the life out of me, even to this day. I was a leader for the age group of 8 to 10, and we're out on a camping trip. It was the first year that we stayed on terrain that was huge. Normally we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids arrive, so we're aware of possible dangers, but this time it's impossible. Every camp we have what we called a night game. It was usually a scary game in which the kids would have to complete several tasks while leaders scared them. Obviously, we had one too during that camp. We mask up as monsters and hide out in the woods close to the checkpoints they have to go past. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide in beside the trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they'd see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes, and you start imagining that things are there that aren't real. During my stay there, I saw a shadow that was around my size running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed that I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end, and I saw the shadow again. This time, I could see it vaguely standing near a tree not too far away from me. I thought it was one of the other leaders hiding trying to scare the kids and decided to go over there as it's about time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards a tree, and while getting closer I noticed that there was indeed someone standing there dressed in what looks like a torn burlap sack over them and a few plastic bags that looks like they've been tied together. I started to feel pure dread, like something's off. I ask if everything's okay and I don't get a response. The only thing I heard was a sound that sounded like somebody knocking on wood. Nevertheless, I went a bit closer until I was about 10 meters away from the person. The knocking sounded like somebody smacking his head onto a tree, and I look and realize it appears to be a male. He's barefoot and his arms and legs were covered in crusted mud. His hands are weirdly cramped up. I'm convinced this was just one of the other leaders playing a prank on me, and I tell them stop. He then slowly turns his head around and starts towards me. Something inside of me told me just to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank, and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank, I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me, and I didn't want to turn around and look in case I ran into a tree. I eventually arrived back at the campsite, and every single person that could be dressed like that is already there. They couldn't have gone there before me, and if they did, they sure as hell didn't have the time to change into normal clothes. I tell them that you've given me a good scare with that, and they look at me weird, thinking, was I trying to scare them? The next day I wanted to check it out. Who knows, maybe some weirdo ate the wrong mushroom and was hiding there but dying of hypothermia. I took someone with me just in case, but it was endless trees. We arrived at the tree. I saw the person banging his head on, and there was a dead, skinned, decomposing rabbit there. We called the cops, and they looked around and quickly brushed it off as a prank from another scouting group or some of the kids. And we didn't notice anything weird after that, but I don't know what to think of it. My friend and I were hiking in Blue Ridge, Georgia. We were just going camping for one day, and the trail was part of the Appalachian Trail. Near the very start of it, my friend told me about one story of one of his friends. He said that he had heard voices and footsteps at night near Blood Mountain, and he had to night hike because the noises were so intense. Now back to the main story. We found a campsite and set up shop. As it got darker, we got a bad feeling like somebody's watching us, and then it started. We saw a pair of glowing eyes about 100 meters away from our fire. Now the thing that was really odd is the color. They're bright red. My friend then goes to dunk his head in the creek near our tent and claims that he felt something pushing him towards the water. His shirt was soaked and his nose was bleeding from a rock. Then after we heard a woman's voice, so we can't really make out exactly what she was saying. We hear it in front of us, behind us, and to the left of us over the creek. It wouldn't have been a night hiker, but there was no trail. I don't know who it could have been, and the night hikers weren't usually going around with glowing red eyes. We also heard footsteps around us and sticks snapping. We finally decide that we have to get out, but must sleep first, and my friend falls asleep before me, and I heard twigs snapping right next to my head outside of the tent. And that's pretty much it. Very, very creepy. If you decide to go camping in Blue Ridge, know that you have to be careful out there. Now, I need to give you some context before starting my story. My parents owned an absolutely beautiful property in a deep part of the forest that nobody ever really went to. My girlfriend was always paranoid, so I'd always have to make fun of her whenever we went there, but she absolutely hated staying there at night. One of the reasons I actually understood. During one time we stayed there during December, I stupidly woke up in the night and turned off all of the radiators because I was worried that there was going to be a fire. We had two oil ones and one electric one, and I was convinced that in the night I would move round and knock off the blanket and make a massive fire and we would die. So she woke up from the cold and said she'd never sleep there again. And I knew that was going to happen, but I decided I wanted to stay there a few nights. So one particular summer evening, around April, we set off and make it to the cabin. Now we're having a really good time there, and my girlfriend decides that she wants to go out into nature to have a look around, because this is something that she loves to do. Now, I don't want to go out this soon. I have some work to do on my laptop, so I'm staying behind to do that. And I'm actually quite annoyed because there's things I want to do with friends that live not too far away, but I just have work to do that's making everything clash. And I don't want to have the feeling, where you've just finished work, then just try and do something social, and your brain just can't connect to changing from work, so you just feel like you're not enjoying it. Well, yeah, I was a bit annoyed trying to work as quick as possible, but God likes a hard worker, so I stay. I say goodbye to my girlfriend as she goes out, then I go into another room. I'm working away on my laptop and I can hear the door open. I think maybe my girlfriend's come back to get something, but I can't hear much. I say to her, "Hey, what have you come back for?" But she doesn't reply. I think this is odd, but I thought she was probably just annoyed at me for something and continue working. I can hear some more movement, then eventually the door closes. I think to myself, great, God knows what I've done wrong now. But I decide that I need to continue working. Deciding that I don't want to be in trouble when she comes back, I decide to give my girlfriend a call and say, "Are you annoyed at me?" To which she's surprised and says no. I say, "Why didn't you say anything when I come in?" She says, "I've been outside the whole time, what are you talking about? Stop playing these games on me." And I say, "No, wait, didn't you come in then just ignore me?" And she says no. She says, "I'm sure it was one of the neighbours in the other properties just getting something and you heard their door." I think this is odd because I haven't heard anybody else around but us, and it's extremely rare that they would visit. I tell her, "Yeah, you're probably right," and go back to my work. I decide that I'm going to have a quick look round and see if anything's missing, but everything's where it should be, so I decide it's probably nothing, and I'm here anyway. I'd happily fight if I need to. I'm not saying I'm strong or anything, but maybe I could scare someone, who knows. So I continue on with my work. Now, I probably do so for another good hour or so, and I take a call off of my friend. He calls to invite me out to a friend's surprise birthday, and I desperately want to go, but I know it's not possible because I have to go out to 2 or 3 other places after, but I really want to try and go, and I tell him not to worry, I'm going to try and make it, but I'll let him know. I say God as I put the phone down. I'm desperate to get out and do things, but I'm chain bound to my laptop doing work. I decide to press on. Now, as I'm doing my work, I get another phone call from my girlfriend who says, "Are you gonna come over?" I say, "What do you mean?" She's probably about 400 meters away from me, but she says, "Where are you?" I say, "I'm in doing my work, you know what I'm doing." She says, "Huh? That's odd, I thought I just saw you outside." I say, "No, I don't think it's anything, but you should probably come back," to which she agrees. I decide to go out and try and meet her halfway there. I think it's a lot safer that way. I actually look around quite paranoid, thinking maybe someone's there, but surely it's my neighbours. I try and affirm to myself. But I'm wrong. I can clearly see into the other cabins that nobody else is home. and I quickly go out and find my girlfriend. More than anything, I'm happy I'm not in trouble for no reason, and my girlfriend's actually relatively happy, so we come back and end up watching a film. Now, we ended up going out for the rest of the day, and luckily, I managed to do all of the things I need to, and I actually feel really happy about this. We then come back to the cabin, and all is normal. We have a really good time, and slowly fall asleep. Now, I probably fell asleep for a couple of minutes when I'm awoken suddenly. My girlfriend's annoyed at me. I don't know what for. She says, "Hey, why do you keep talking?" I say, "What are you talking about? I haven't said a word to you." She gets angry and says, "Stop kidding, I'm actually really scared now." I say again, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been asleep the whole time." She says, "Were you not talking to me?" I said, "No, of course not. It's probably just in my sleep. Now you need to do the same." My girlfriend eventually falls asleep, and I do too. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I have a strange feeling that something's off. I can't really describe exactly what it is, but I feel like somebody's behind me when I'm working on my laptop, and one of the things I made has gone missing. I think it's really strange because it's work related, and I don't understand why my girlfriend would move it or anyone would take it. I was actually worried at the time that I had memory issues because of an injury from work, but it turns out I was wrong about it and I just had poor memory. So I kind of brush it off as nothing and just me going a bit senile. Now, I drink some of my water, and not long afterwards I feel really weird. I feel really lightheaded and dizzy, almost like I've been drugged or something. I think I've just stayed up too long trying to do work, and I decide to lay down. I don't tell my girlfriend what's wrong because, like I said at the time, I was really worried about having some kind of brain issue from work. My girlfriend then goes out again eventually, and I just tell her have a good time and she goes. Now, I wake up 2 hours later to miss phone calls off my girlfriend. I have the worst headache ever, and I realise my girlfriend's just moving out the door now. I say, "Hey, where are you going?" but she doesn't reply to me. I then go to call her quickly because I don't feel like moving, and she says, "Why haven't you answered my calls?" I say, "What do you mean? Why did you just leave?" My girlfriend then goes completely silent and quickly comes inside. She then says, "What's wrong with you? You look absolutely horrible." I say, "I don't know, I feel really bad at the minute." I say, "I think it's an injury from work," but she says, "No, it can't be." I then realise that it's probably from what I just drank. I say, "Babe, don't drink any of the water, there's definitely something wrong here." But then she reminds me, "What do you mean I just left?" I say, "When I was waking up, I saw you quickly leave through the door." To which my girlfriend gives me a pure look of horror and says, "No, I was outside for the last 2 hours and got annoyed you wouldn't reply to my calls, but I thought you were busy working." I then tell her frantically, "No, ever since I've drank this water I felt terrible, but I definitely saw you or someone leaving." We then both look at each other horrified. I quickly go and grab a knife and start shouting at whoever it is to come out or I'm gonna stab them. It must have looked pretty funny because I was saying things I'd seen in movies, but we're both scared now. My girlfriend goes and waits by the window because it's safer there. I search every inch of the apartment and I can't find anything. I think this is really strange and I say we have to get out of here and make a police report. My girlfriend agrees and we gather up the stuff we need, which is basically our laptops, and quickly head over to the car. Just as I'm about to drive off, my girlfriend says, "No, wait, look." I don't know what she's talking about, but she says, "Look, please, do you not see that?" I look up and I can clearly see some kind of marks on the window. I get out really quickly, this time filled with rage. I still have a terrible headache and I just assumed I was dehydrated, but I make my way over to the cabin windows and I can clearly see handprints all over them. They're from the outside too, and there's lots of different hands of different sizes. I don't need to hang around much longer. I just played it cool and quickly sprinted back to the truck. Well, as cool as you can look when you look terrified and you don't say anything and just run and hit the accelerator as quick as possible. My girlfriend doesn't actually say anything to me because it's clear what's happened. She has better eyes than I do and she can see all of the handprints. I didn't want to tell her when we were driving away that all of them were different sizes. We eventually make it over to my parents' house and I go and tell my dad what happened. I don't want to tell my girlfriend too many details because I know she'll get really scared, and I trusted telling my dad. My dad gave me a funny look and told me that some of the neighbours have reported seeing weird things out in the forest at night, in the sense of figures in all black walking round, seemingly trying desperately not to be spotted. I say, Dad, why didn't you tell me? And he says, son, I didn't want to worry you. I'm sorry for what's happened. I forget to tell my dad about the water that I've drank and how strange I felt, and my dad gives me a really weird look saying they probably drugged you and they were probably trying to kidnap you. I feel absolutely awful now. I'm more annoyed at myself for being so ignorant. Even if I'd got one of them with the knife, surely the others would have come. The weird thing was though, there was almost no signs of anybody around other than the person I saw in the handprints. I mean, you'd think all of the leaves in the forest would have been disturbed, but they were pretty normal, and I just don't know what to think of it. Of course, we never went back there again, but I haven't really felt right about the whole situation since, and I actually get really paranoid when I'm going to sleep. I'm not a ranger, but I was out camping with my dog one night along the Mulligan rim of Arizona. It was dark, and we're sitting around the campfire when we hear something behind a bush close to our camp. Instead of my dog barking at it, he begins to whimper. I didn't think anything of it and just tend to the fire. After a couple of minutes, we hear more noises from a different bush. Now this time my dog gets up and goes over to the tent and searches the door because he wants to go in. I toss a couple of rocks in the direction that I heard the noise from and nothing happened. I'm spooked now, so I toss a couple of pieces of wood onto the fire and climb into the tent with my dog, hoping that the light from the fire keeps us away. We eventually fall asleep and luckily had no other disturbances during the night. The next morning, however, I go out behind the bushes where we heard the noises and found mountain lion tracks that had been circling our camp. I'm sure glad that we didn't actually go out to explore what was happening, and thank God for our fire. We live in a rural area, however, there are houses close to mine. We have a puppy, so one of us will always take him out. About a month ago, I had taken him out while we were out there, and I heard my boyfriend's voice calling my name. However, he wasn't outside, and he had a very similar experience where a voice whistled and called his puppy's name. What is this, and how do we get rid of it? I used to go hunting in southern Illinois on my property that my family owns. This place is literally my second home, and I've spent countless hours exploring every inch of it. I caught all the fish in the area, hunted every legal game and spotted the rest. So, when I say that I've never had an experience like this, just remember that this was my domain that I felt very comfortable in any weather at any time with any equipment, or lack thereof. Now 2 deer seasons ago, I pulled into the farm at probably about 4:30 in the morning, November, so at least 2 hours till sunlight. I put my stuff out of the truck and walked into the woods. Now I've got my shotgun and my revolver, so I'm fairly confident really. Now, I've also got my coffee with me and a backpack with a book and a couple of other things for cleaning my deer should I get lucky. So I walk off the drive and into the woods. The tree stand I'm going to is less than a mile away, but through some dense second growth forest and down a rather steep hill, across some bottoms, then a long burning steep climb up to another ridge. I always dread the hike, but it's a good spot so I often do it. I make it to the bottom, slush through the icky muck and get to the climb in. With my flashlight clipped to my chest, I keep needing to physically turn my body to throw the beam around and see the trees that I don't recognize so I can figure out where I am to determine my path with the ones I know. This, of course, always gives the forest a real horror movie vibe. Even on the best of days, the leaves and underbrush and encased forest are really creepy sometimes, so every one of my steps comes with a solid crunch no matter how quiet I'm trying to be. Now though, I noticed that there was more noise than normal. Something else was crunchy too. I walked about a quarter of the way up the hill listening to my company the whole time, seeming to stay the same distance away as I moved. Naturally, I think to myself that I'm going to have a quick hunting day, so I plopped myself down next to a tree. I can't shoot till first light, but I'm hoping if I stay really still that whatever I'm hearing will lounge around until then. So I click my light off, unhustle my shotgun, and lay it over my knees and wait. Except I don't hear anything now. Whatever it was must have been spooked by my flashlight spinning all the time. I'm still and start sipping my coffee to make sure, but give up after 15 minutes or so of dead silence. I probably didn't make even 4 steps before the second moving thing starts again. At this point, I'm not freaked out. I stay facing the way I am and flick on the light again and off quickly and step behind a tree. Sure enough, I don't hear a thing. 2 minutes of sitting there frustrated pass before I start moving again. This time, my new friend starts to move with me. This is when I start to freak out because I work my way up the hill, stopping to turn around and look every so often. When I stopped, the sound would go on for just an uneasy amount of time after I'd actually finished my own steps, like something saw me stop, and then did its very best to stop before I heard it, but it never worked. This happened no less than 4 times, and by now I'm sweating bullets and freezing cold, because it's in the middle of winter. I abandoned my farmhouse near a tree so I could hold my flashlight and revolver at the same time. The last 100 feet or so to my stand was done backwards so I could be facing the noise, and in theory this means that it won't move. Now, I keep doing this moving backward and I don't hear anything. I got into my stand, smoked probably 5 cigarettes in a row. It gave me a sense of security being up in a tree behind camouflage. Still, I only hunted for like an hour of daylight and went back early. And I wasn't moving slow, I head straight back into the truck, even with the sun shining bright. I even told my family about it, but they wouldn't believe me. It was so freaky. The sound really sounds kind of human, but I'm not sure. It could have likely been poachers or trespassers, or the occasional wanderer onto the property, but still, ever since I went back hunting, I'm always much better at letting people know where I'm gonna go and how long I'm gonna be out there for. This event occurred in early fall 1971 or 1972. I'm not sure what jogged this memory, but it's probably to do with some of the stories I've been reading. Also, the details are sometimes grey, but I'll get to the point. I grew up in the Philly suburbs. The Boy Scouts were popular then, and I was quite active, especially with camping. One of the go-to areas was the New Jersey pine barrens, especially along the Wading River and the Bass River State Forest onto the Man. Now, our patrol was on a weekend camping trip at South Shore Campground, I think. Lots of pine breaks, but even more swamps and boggy swamps. Our patrol, which is probably 7 of us plus one guy whose dad drove us, was assigned to a three-sided shelter. The front of the shelter was open to the swamp. If you walked literally 11 feet from the shelter, you'd be standing in ankle-deep water. And then, it just got deeper and deeper and boggier. We mucked about Saturday until late afternoon, making our way to the shelter, cook dinner and chill until it gets dark. And it was crazy dark. I mean, no other campers around, just the light of our slowly dying fire. We began to hear a slow splashing coming from around the swamp, maybe 100 feet from our fire. One of the guys yelled something towards the sound and everything goes quiet. A minute later, the splashing began again, but slower and methodical. By this time, it was only about 15 feet away from the fire, but was out of the fire's light. Here's what our vibe was. None of us were concerned. We're all seasoned campers and figured it was a deer or raccoon looking to score an easy meal. Suddenly, the walking becomes slow and steady and sloshing. This perks us up, wondering if this thing may have suddenly decided to rush us. Our patrol leader jumps up, grabs his flashlight and pointed it towards the noise. His light hit something and yelled, "It's a man!" and ran to the swamp berm. I saw a brief flash of red flannel in the flashlight beam and then heard splashing back into the swamp. The splashing eventually faded to darkness. So what did we do? Tried to figure out what the hell just happened, then crawled into our sleeping bags to fall asleep. Nothing else had happened, and we went home the next day as scheduled. Thinking back on it now, it must have been a local piney who knew the area well. The man had to be native though, because he was going through some seriously dangerous swamps to check us out. So anyway, the pines have a great vibe, which is really eerie, and we had a great weekend. I'm not the kind of person to believe this kind of stuff, especially because I'm not superstitious at all, but these two encounters made me doubt whatever was actually happening on this farm. The first encounter occurred when me and two friends were having dinner. Everything was calm. We're eating outside, since this is a relatively big space. That's until we heard somebody scream. It's extremely odd because the country that I'm in is extremely safe, so this is weird. There's not really animal attacks here either. Now I'm the first one to react. I climb onto the wall that separated the house grounds from the animal parts. From there, I can see almost all the houses near ours. As I'm climbing up, I'm really not sure what to think, and my friends get there right after me. We stay in total silence waiting for another scream, and we heard it. This time, we could understand what she said. "Help," she yelled, then a bunch of gibberish that nobody could really understand. One of my friends quickly grabs a phone to call the police as we assume it could be domestic violence or robbery, and I grab my axe. My other friend follows me to the gate. We didn't leave. Nobody knew what we could find, since something sounded odd about the screams. Right before the police arrived, we heard a thud, and then glass breaking. I assume it was a window. As soon as the police arrived, the screams stopped, never to be heard again. The police found nothing. Later that night, me and my friends stayed up, chatting about what happened. One of them was oddly quiet when I asked him what was wrong, and he simply said, "I've heard those screams before." Apparently, he had heard the woman scream a couple of times while walking his dog. The next day we get up and decide to go check the house where the screams are coming from. But there was one weird thing about it when we arrive at the place, because there was no house. It was a forest, with nothing other than big trees and bushes. We came back and decided to forget what happened since we want to have a good time. No one would relate this encounter with a skinwalker obviously, and I didn't either at first, but when it happened twice I started to connect everything. The second encounter happened when my cousins were over, similar to the previous night. We were having a good peaceful dinner, That's when me and my cousins decided to go for a little walk in the garden we had. The garden made frontier with a huge forest, only separated by a small stone wall. We were just talking and laughing when I started to hear a man talking. Not in a normal voice, sounded like there was something in his throat, producing a really weird frequency sound. Again, I grabbed my axe and called the cousins. We got ourselves near the wall to hear what he was saying. Like, the first encounter we could only understand gibberish coming from him, and he wouldn't stop talking, not even breaking to catch his breath. After a while listening to it, we realised that we couldn't do anything about it, so decided to leave and finish our dinner. They leave, and I'm actually on my own now. It was quite unsettling. Then I start overthinking and thinking more, and I remember at times my dog would spend entire nights barking at the forest when all the existing animals we wiped out by the hunters. I remembered the warnings my parents gave me as a child to always leave that forest and lock the doors before sunset. Regardless of my questions, I know they'll never be answered. But it's something I just can't understand. Now, it all ended when the lumberjacks cut down all the grown trees, leaving the forest pretty visible. After they cut down the trees, whatever the thing was making sounds completely stopped, and my dog stopped barking at the wall. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid, but I'm not sure what to think. My dad and I went on a hiking trip a few days ago. My dad is a waterfall fanatic. He wants to see as many as possible. So he and I are hiking along a very pretty trail. We're hiking along a river. It's flowing nicely. There's mountains all around us. The trail is weaving around big, beautiful boulders. I'm hiking at most 30 feet ahead of him, looking for a spot to sit down and have picnic lunch on. And as I round a blind curve in the trail, I just freeze. Sitting on a stump maybe 10 feet off to the right is a guy. But he's wearing one of those colourful badger hoodies with the hoodie pulled up. He's wearing a Halloween style bunny mask. He sees me and stands up right after my dad rounds a corner. We are all three sizing each other up in silence, and my dad addresses him. "What's up, buddy?" The masked man then tips his head as though he's deciding what to do with us. He then finally speaks, saying, "Oh, not much. You aren't the guys I'm waiting for. You have a good day." And then he turns and jogs off quickly. Strapped on his lower back is a large hunting knife and a pistol. We lose sight of him pretty quick. We hadn't seen a soul on the trail all day, and we'd been there for almost 4 hours. Needless to say, we leave the waterfall for another day and turn quick. Once we're off the trail, we report it to the local forest service and police, but they say they can't do much aside from keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. Now, the guy had no backpack or water or anything, which makes me think that he either had it stashed somewhere or was camping nearby. I hate to admit it, but I desperately wanted to ask the guy who he was looking for and why. Let me start by saying that I love camping. Anytime my friends and I come home from college, we loaded up our cooler with beer, grab some gear and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or friends ever wanted to go with me, so I often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed my gear, hopped in my car I borrowed from a buddy and drove to a spot that's secluded yet within safety of civilization if I need to get help. Camping also creeps me out though, but that feeling is always outweighed by the joy of it. So I make a little camp and a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much, but I'm enjoying myself reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling that I'm being watched and stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, but see a doe vault from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to camping. I just kept freaking myself out though, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whistling and just enjoying myself. Around 1, I decided to get into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I'd been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars until I passed out. It's around 2 AM. I hear footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or some animal, maybe a raccoon, but I'm on guard. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open later, and I hear a rubbing sound and the tent fabric being pushed in a bit. I don't know what to do. I'm paralyzed with fear. I desperately wanted to go and get the knife and stab this person, but I think maybe it's one of my buddies messing with me. Suddenly, it stopped. I was starting to feel more secure because daylight's coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I'm sure as hell not gonna sleep. All of a sudden, it's about 4 o'clock. I realise I should have my boots on in case anything were to happen. After having stayed up and keeping alert for a little longer, my friend's car alarm goes screaming. I sprint out of the tent. I got about 2 steps out before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead, the person stops me. I've heard that people can perform insane feats of strength with adrenaline rush. In my case, I just clamped down. His finger popped off almost. He screamed and pulled his hand away. He took off, running down the hill and into the opposite direction. I take off. I must have looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. I quickly make it into the car and speed it out of there, calling up my friends, telling them what's happened and the police, and get some real clothing. When the cops get there, they checked it out. The cops went out with a light. They brought me back some of my things that I left there. But what made me most scared is that right next to the tent was a gas can, and lighter fluid had been poured around my tent. The kicker is, they never caught the guy. So somewhere out there is some crazy guy that's looking to make fires in tents with people in them. Growing up, every summer in July and August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at the White Lake State Park in Tamworth, NH. Some of my best childhood memories were made there, with rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, etc. Now when I was around my late teens, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandpa passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory always stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 PM at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheap little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go and get some privacy to return the call. I then took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that, at the end, leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom. I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground was where I'm going and it's vacant. There was no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark, so I chose a campsite. I sit down at a table. There's lights from a distance that light up from behind the top of the hill behind me, illuminating my surroundings just a bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see the silhouette coming down from the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all the empty campsites are. I can see it's a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campsite for a night walk. The people I see usually have flashlights, so this person doesn't, but I'm not creeped out, just curious. As the person gets closer, I can see the outline better now, and that it's a man. I also noticed his pace slows down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continue conversing on my cell phone. A minute or two passes by now, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. Now I don't know if he can see me. Oh wait, he can now. He's staring at me. I step back. He was a little heavy and tall. I can make out he's wearing a jacket. I can't see many facial features, but I would guess that I was staring at a man in his late 40s or 50s. Alarm bells are going off in my head now. My mind has turned to mush at this point and I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend is saying. I just stare off at this guy. He starts moving now. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want to make a sound. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunch form. It looked as though he was charging towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of my mind-mushy frozen state and leaped forward off the picnic table and began running through the campsite back towards the trail. Thud, thud, thud. I can hear him getting closer now, leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he gets close to whereabout I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and the sound of someone annoyed that they've tripped or hurt themselves. Most likely he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason it was, it causes him to just stop. I don't stop looking back. I just keep running and running until finally I make it back to my family's campsite. When I got back there, they're still having laughs and smiles by the campfire. I break down crying and I'm trembling. I explain what happened, and my aunt woke up and said, "Oh God." He probably thought that he was someone he knew and was doing it as a joke, dismissing me. My cousin saying, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realised he didn't know you, idiot." I wish I was taken seriously, but other than that one thing happening, there was no reason for them to really be afraid. My experience makes me think twice about going alone camping now. I always carry pepper spray with me too, and an alarm. I hope I never see that guy again. Now, while I was growing up, my family would visit the same lake every year for every summer weekend. As we got older, we would visit a large rock we called the Cliffs and jump off it. The rock's only about 15 feet tall at the highest point. For the water, that's really deep. When we got older, we would jump in and try and touch the bottom, but we never could. When my brother and I were in our teens, we took our kayaks to the cliff's edge to jump on our own. We jump off several times. We then find a nice cold spot at the very top of the cliffs and chill there for a bit. As we're sitting there, we notice a white shape in the water, floating towards the surface. It's the letter H. Eventually, it sank back into the water and we lose sight. Before we can look away or even say anything else, another shape was floating upwards, the letter E. Eventually, it too sank below, but it was followed by two more letters, L, P. We didn't jump in after that. We stood up without saying a word and left. We never mentioned it to anyone, and I forgot it even happened. Several years ago, I was working as a camp counselor and told this story as a ghost story. I'd almost forgotten about it and texted my brother to see if I hadn't made it up completely. I asked him if he remembered the time we jumped off the cliffs and saw something in the water. He said yes. I asked him what it was and he too said it spelled out help. One of my friends always has these get-rich-quick schemes or shady ways of making money on the side. Now in one of his more brilliant moves, he decides that he's going to rent a house out near the country line to host illegal poker games in. Yep. Anyway, on this property is probably 4 or 5 acres with this tiny rundown church about 1,000 yards away on the side, and there's a redneck guy who lives on the side in a trailer probably a quarter of a mile or so down the road. However, the property backs up to the woods, and since it's always cheaper than the range, and I and a third friend ask our renter friend if we can go shoot some guns on the property. He obliges us, and we head out there on a Saturday afternoon and find a nice berm at the tree line to shoot into. Now we're just shooting paper targets with pistols, so we're not that far back, and don't need that much room to do so. After a few magazines, we decide to venture deep into the woods to see just how far the property goes. Now we get down to the bottom of the hill and see fluorescent ribbons that the server ties to the trees to mark property lines. We realise that the property is way bigger than we ever thought before. We're already 200 yards into the woods now. Now just as we're remarking how big it is, we see a dead animal about 10 yards away from the property line. Walking up to examine it, we see that it's a goat that's had its head cut off, clearly done by a human. Then we see a severed goat head a little further away. Now the really creepy part to this is that it's not the same goat. There's two separate ones, and clearly due to the decay, it's been multiple days apart. Now if we weren't armed it would have been way scarier, but it's still creepy because I fear humans more than anything in the woods now. Now I say this was out in the country, but it's in South Carolina, so there's really not crazy expanses of wilderness being an East Coast state that's pretty much all settled by people. The thing that gets me now is that there was a serial killer caught not too long ago around the time we were there, and apparently he started on animals too.